Chapter 8 of the Old Curiosity Shop. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Nicholson. The Old Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens. Chapter 8. Business disposed of, Mr Swiveller was inwardly reminded of its being nigh dinner time, and to the intent that his health might not be endangered by longer abstinence, dispatched a message to the nearest eating-house, requiring an immediate supply of boiled beef and greens for two. With this demand, however, the eating-house, having experience of its customer, declined to comply, churlishly sending back for answer that if Mr Swiveller stood in need of beef, perhaps he would be so obliging as to come there and eat it, bringing with him, as grace before meat, the amount of a certain small account which had long been outstanding. Not at all intimidated by this rebuff, but rather sharpened in wits and appetite, Mr Swiveller forwarded the same message to another and more distant eating-house, adding to it by way of rider that the gentleman was induced to send so far, not only by the great fame and popularity its beef had acquired, but in consequence of the extreme toughness of the beef retailed at the obdurant cook's shop, which rendered it quite unfit not merely for gentlemanly food, but for any human consumption. The good effect of this politic course was demonstrated by the speedy arrival of a small pewter pyramid, curiously constructed of platters and covers, whereof the boiled beef plates formed the base, and a foaming quart pot the apex. The structure, being resolved into its component parts, afforded all things requisite and necessary for a hearty meal, to which Mr Swiveller and his friend applied themselves with great keenness and enjoyment. The present moment,' said Dick, sticking his fork into a large carbuncular potato, 'be the worst of our lives. I like the plan of sending him with the peel on. There's a charm in drawing a potato from its native element, if I may so express it, to which the rich and powerful are strangers. Man wants but little here below, nor wants that little long. How true that is, after dinner.' 'I hope the eating-house keeper will want but little, and that he may not want that little long,' returned his companion. 'But I suspect you've no means of paying for this.' 'I shall be passing present, and I'll call,' said Dick, winking his eye significantly. 'The waiter's quite helpless. The goods are gone, Fred, and there's an end of it.' In point of fact, it would seem that the waiter felt this wholesome truth, for when he returned for the empty plates and dishes, and was informed by Mr Swiveller with dignified carelessness that he would call and settle when he should be passing presently, he displayed some perturbation of spirit, and muttered a few remarks about payment on delivery, and no trust, and other unpleasant subjects, but was fain to content himself with inquiring at what hour it was likely that the gentleman would call, in order that being presently responsible for the beef, greens, and sundries, he might take to be in the way at the time. Mr Swiveller, after mentally calculating his engagements to a nicety, replied that he should look in at from 2 minutes before 6 and 7 minutes past, and the man disappearing with this feeble consolation, Richard Swiveller took a greasy memorandum book from his pocket and made an entry therein. 'Is that a reminder in case you should forget to call?' said Trent with a sneer. 'Not exactly, Fred,' replied the imperturbable Richard, continuing to write with a businesslike air. 'I enter in this little book the names of the streets that I can't go down while the shops are open. This dinner to-day closes Longacre. I bought a pair of boots in Great Queen Street last week, and made that no thoroughfare too. There's only one avenue to the Strand left open now, and I shall have to stop up that to-night with a pair of gloves. The roads are closing so fast in every direction, that in a month's time, unless my aunt sends me a remittance, I shall have to go 3 or 4 miles out of town to get over the way.' 'There's no fear of failing in the end?' said Trent. 'Why, I hope not,' returned Mr Swiveller. 'But the average number of letters it takes to soften her is 6, and this time we've got as far as 8, without any effect at all. I'll write another to-morrow morning. I mean to blot it a good deal, and shake some water over it out of the pepper caster to make it look penitent. I'm in such a state of mind that I hardly know what I write. Blot.
If you could see me at this minute shedding tears for my past misconduct, Peppercaster, my hand trembles when I think. Blot again. If that don't produce the effect, it's all over.' By this time Mr Swiveller had finished his entry, and he now replaced his pencil in its little sheath and closed the book in a perfectly grave and serious frame of mind. His friend discovered that it was time for him to fulfil some other engagement, and Richard Swiveller was accordingly left alone in company with the rosy wine and his own meditations touching Miss Sophy Wackles. 'It's rather sudden,' said Dick, shaking his head with a look of infinite wisdom, and running on, as he was accustomed to do, with scraps of verse as if they were only prose in a hurry. 'When the heart of a man is depressed with fears, the mist is dispelled when Miss Wackles appears. She's a very nice girl. She's like the red, red rose that's newly sprung in June. There's no denying that. She's also like a melody that's sweetly played in tune. It's really very sudden. Not that there's any need, on account of Fred's little sister, to turn cool directly, but it's better not to go too far. If I begin to cool at all, I must begin at once. I see that. There's a chance of an action for breach. That's another. There's the chance of... No, there's no chance of that, but it's as well to be on the safe side.' This undeveloped consideration was a possibility which Richard Swiveller sought to conceal even from himself, of his not being proof against the charms of Miss Wackles, and in some unguarded moment, by linking his fortunes to hers for ever, of putting it out of his own power to further their notable scheme to which he had so readily become a party. For all these reasons he decided to pick a quarrel with Miss Wackles without delay, and casting about for a pretext, determined in favour of groundless jealousy. Having made up his mind on this important point, he circulated the glass from his right hand to left and back again, pretty freely, to enable him to act his part with the greater discretion, and then, after making some slight improvements in his toilet, bent his steps towards the spot hallowed by the fair object of his meditations. The spot was at Chelsea, for there Miss Sophia Wackles resided with her widowed mother and 2 sisters, in conjunction with whom she maintained a very small day school for young ladies of proportionate dimensions, a circumstance which was made known to the neighbourhood by an oval board over the front first-floor windows, whereupon appeared, in circumambient flourishes, the words, "Ladies' Seminary," and which was further published and proclaimed at intervals between the hours of 9:30 and 10 in the morning, by a straggling and solitary young lady of tender years, standing on the scraper on the tips of her toes, and making futile attempts to reach the knocker with spelling-book. The several duties of instruction in this establishment were thus discharged: English grammar, composition, geography, and the use of the dumbbells, by Miss Melissa Wackles; writing, arithmetic, dancing, music, and general fascination, by Miss Sophia Wackles; the art of needlework, marking, and samplery, by Miss Jane Wackles; corporal punishment, fasting, and other tortures and terrors, by Mrs Wackles. Miss Melissa Wackles was the eldest daughter, Miss Sophie the next, and Miss Jane the youngest. Miss Melissa might have seen 35 summers or thereabouts, and verged on the autumnal. Miss Sophie was a fresh, good-humoured, buxom girl of 20, and Miss Jane numbered scarcely 16 years. Mrs Wackles was an excellent but rather venomous old lady of 60. To this ladies' seminary, then, Richard Swiveller hied, with designs obnoxious to the peace of the fair Sophia, who, arrayed in virgin white, embellished by no ornament but one blushing rose, received him on his arrival in the midst of very elegant, not to say brilliant, preparations, such as the embellishment of the room with the little flower pots which always stood on the window-sill outside, save in windy weather when they blew into the area, the choice attire of the day scholars who were allowed to grace the festival, the unwonted curls of Miss Jane Wackles, who had kept her head during the whole of the preceding day screwed up tight in a yellow playbill, and the solemn gentility and stately bearing of the old lady and her eldest daughter, which struck Mr Swiveller as being uncommon, but made no further impression upon him. The truth is,
and, as there is no accounting for tastes, even a taste so strange as this may be recorded without being looked upon as a wilful and malicious invention, the truth is that neither Mrs Wackles nor her eldest daughter had at any time greatly favoured the pretensions of Mr Swiveller, being accustomed to make slight mention of him as a gay young man, and to sigh and shake their heads ominously whenever his name was mentioned. Mr Swiveller's conduct in respect to Miss Sophy having been of that vague and dilatory kind which is usually looked upon as betokening no fixed matrimonial intentions, the young lady herself began in course of time to deem it highly desirable that it should be brought to an issue one way or other. Hence she had at last consented to play off against Richard Swiveller a stricken market gardener, known to be ready with his offer on the smallest encouragement. And hence, as this occasion had been specially assigned for the purpose, that great anxiety on her part for Richard Swiveller's presence which had occasioned her to leave the note he has been seen to receive.
If he has any expectations at all, or any means of keeping a wife well, said Mrs Wackles to her eldest daughter, he'll say 'em to us now or never.
If he really cares about me, thought Miss Sophy, he must tell me so to-night. But all these sayings and doings and thinkings being unknown to Mr Swiveller, affected him not in the least. He was debating in his mind how he could best turn jealous, and wishing that Sophy were for that occasion only far less pretty than she was, or that she were her own sister, which would have served his turn as well, when the company came, and among them the market gardener, whose name was Cheggs. But Mr Cheggs came not alone or unsupported, for he prudently brought along with him his sister, Miss Cheggs, who, making straight to Miss Sophy, and taking her by both hands, and kissing her on both cheeks, hoped in an audible whisper that they had not come too early.
'Too early, no,'
replied Miss Sophy.
'Oh, my dear,'
rejoined Miss Cheggs, in the same whisper as before,
I've been so tormented, so worried. It's a mercy we're not here at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Alec has been in such a state of impatience to come. You'd hardly believe that he was dressed before dinner time, and has been looking at the clock and teasing me ever since. It's all your fault, you naughty thing.
Hereupon Miss Sophy blushed, and Mr Cheggs, who was bashful before ladies, blushed too, and Miss Sophy's mother and sisters, to prevent Mr Cheggs from blushing more, lavished civilities and attentions upon him, and left Richard Swiveller to take care of himself. Here was the very thing he wanted. Here was good cause, reason, and foundation for pretending to be angry. But having this cause, reason, and foundation which he had come expressly to seek, not expecting to find, Richard Swiveller was angry in sound earnest, and wondered what the devil Cheggs meant by his impudence. However, Mr Swiveller had Miss Sophy's hand for the first quadrille, country dances being low were utterly proscribed, and so gained an advantage over his rival, who sat despondingly in a corner and contemplated the glorious figure of the young lady as she moved through the mazy dance. Nor was this the only start Mr Swiveller had of the market gardener. For determining to show the family what quality of man they trifled with, and influenced perhaps by his late libations, he performed such feats of agility and such spins and twirls as filled the company with astonishment, and in particular caused a very long gentleman who was dancing with a very short scholar to stand quite transfixed by wonder and admiration. Even Mrs Wackles forgot for the moment to snub 3 small young ladies who were inclined to be happy, and could not repress a rising thought that to have such a dancer as that in the family would be a pride indeed. At this momentous crisis, Miss Cheggs proved herself a vigorous and useful ally, for not confining herself to expressing by scornful smiles a contempt for Mr Swiveller's accomplishments, she took every opportunity of whispering into Miss Sophy's ear expressions of condolence and sympathy on her being worried by such a ridiculous creature, declaring that she was frightened to death lest Alec should fall upon and beat him in the fullness of his wrath, and entreating Miss Sophy to observe how the eyes of the said Alec gleamed with love and fury, passions, it may be observed, which being too much for his eyes, rushed into his nose also, and suffused it with a crimson glow.
'You must dance with Miss Cheggs,'
said Miss Sophy to Dick Swiveller, after she had herself danced twice with Mr Cheggs, and made great show of encouraging his advances.
She's a nice girl, and her brother's quite delightful.
Quite delightful, is he? Muttered Dick. Quite delighted too, I should say, from the manner in which he's looking this way. Here Miss Jane, previously instructed for the purpose, interposed her many curls, and whispered her sister to observe how jealous Mr Cheggs was. Jealous? Like his impudence, said Richard Swiveller.
His impudence, Mr Swiveller,
said Miss Jane, tossing her head.
Take care he don't hear you, sir, or you may be sorry for it.
Oh, pray, Jane, said Miss Sophy.
Nonsense, replied her sister. Why shouldn't Mr Cheggs be jealous if he likes? I like that, certainly. Mr Cheggs has a good right to be jealous as anyone else has, and perhaps he may have a better right soon if he hasn't already. You know best about that, Sophy.
Though this was a concerted plot between Miss Sophy and her sister, originating in humane intentions, and having for its object the inducing Mr Swiveller to declare himself in time, it failed in its effect, for Miss Jane, being one of those young ladies who are prematurely shrill and shrewish, gave such undue importance to her part that Mr Swiveller retired in dudgeon, resigning his mistress to Mr Cheggs, and conveying a defiance into his looks which that gentleman indignantly returned. "Did you speak to me, sir?" said Mr Cheggs, following him into a corner. "Have the kindness to smile, sir, in order that we may not be suspected. Did you speak to me, sir?" Mr Swiveller looked with a supercilious smile at Mr Cheggs's toes, then raised his eyes from them to his ankles, and from that to his shin, from that to his knee, and so on very gradually, keeping up his right leg, until he reached his waistcoat, when he raised his eyes from button to button until he reached his chin, and travelling straight up the middle of his nose, came at last to his eyes, when he said abruptly, "No, sir, I didn't." "Ahem!" said Mr Cheggs, glancing over his shoulder. "Have the goodness to smile again, sir. Perhaps you wished to speak to me, sir?"
No, sir, I didn't do that either."
"Perhaps you may have nothing to say to me now, sir?" said Mr Cheggs fiercely. At these words Richard Swiveller withdrew his eyes from Mr Cheggs's face, and travelling down the middle of his nose, and down his waistcoat, and down his right leg, reached his toes again, and carefully surveyed him. This done, he crossed over, and coming up the other leg, and thence approaching by the waistcoat as before, said, when he had got to his eyes, "No, sir, I haven't." "Oh, indeed, sir," said Mr Cheggs. "I'm glad to hear it. You know where I'm to be found, I suppose, sir, in case you should have anything to say to me?" "I can easily inquire, sir, when I want to know. There's nothing more we need say, I believe, sir." "Nothing more, sir." With that, they closed the tremendous dialogue by frowning mutually. Mr Cheggs hastened to tender his hand to Miss Sophy, and Mr Swiveller sat himself down in a corner, in a very moody state. Hard by this corner, Mrs Wackles and Miss Wackles were seated, looking on at the dance, and unto Mrs and Miss Wackles, Miss Cheggs occasionally darted when her partner was occupied with a share of the figure, and made some remark or other which was gall and wormwood to Richard Swiveller's soul. Looking into the eyes of Mrs and Miss Wackles for encouragement, and sitting very upright and uncomfortable on a couple of hard stools, were two of the day scholars, and when Miss Wackles smiled, and Mrs Wackles smiled, the two little girls on the stools sought to curry favour by smiling likewise, in gracious acknowledgment of which attention the old lady frowned them down instantly, and said that if they dared to be guilty of such an impertinence again, they should be sent under convoy to their respective homes. This threat caused one of the young ladies, she being of a weak and trembling temperament, to shed tears, and for this offence they were both filed off immediately, with a dreadful promptitude that struck terror into the souls of all the pupils.
"I've got such news for you," said Miss Cheggs, approaching once more.
Alick has been saying such things to Sophy. Upon my word, you know, it's quite serious and in earnest. That's clear.' 'What's he been saying, my dear?' demanded Mrs Wackles. 'All manner of things,' replied Miss Cheggs. 'You can't think how out he has been speaking.'
Richard Swiveller considered it advisable to hear no more, but taking advantage of a pause in the dancing and the approach of Mr Cheggs to pay his court to the old lady, swaggered with an extremely careful assumption of extreme carelessness towards the door, passing on the way Miss Jane Wackles, who in all the glory of her curls was holding a flirtation, as good practice when no better was to be had, with a feeble old gentleman who lodged in the parlour. Near the door sat Miss Sophy, still fluttered and confused by the attentions of Mr Cheggs, and by her side Richard Swiveller lingered for a moment to exchange a few parting words. 'My boat is on the shore, and my bark is on the sea, but before I pass this door, I will say farewell to thee,' murmured Dick, looking gloomily upon her.
'Are you going?'
said Miss Sophy, whose heart sank within her at the result of her stratagem, but who affected a light indifference notwithstanding.
'Am I going?'
echoed Dick bitterly.
'Yes, I am. What then?' 'Nothing, except that it's very early,' said Miss Sophy. 'But you are your own master, of course.' 'I would that I had been my own mistress too,' said Dick, 'before I had ever entertained a thought of you. Miss Wackles, I believed you true, and I was blessed in so believing, but now I mourn that ere I knew a girl so fair yet so deceiving.'
Miss Sophy bit her lip, and affected to look with great interest after Mr Cheggs, who was quaffing lemonade in the distance. 'I came here,' said Dick, rather oblivious of the purpose with which he had really come, 'with my bosom expanded, my heart dilated, and my sentiments of a corresponding description. I go away with feelings that may be conceived, but cannot be described; feeling within myself that desolating truth, that my best affections have experienced this night a stifler.'
'I am sure I don't know what you mean, Mr Swiveller,'
said Miss Sophy, with downcast eyes.
'I'm very sorry if—' 'Sorry, ma'am,'
said Dick.
'Sorry in the possession of a Cheggs, but I wish you a very good night, concluding with this slight remark, that there is a young lady growing up at this present moment for me, who has not only great personal attractions, but great wealth, and who has requested her next of kin to propose for my hand, which, having a regard for some members of her family, I have consented to promise. It's a gratifying circumstance, which you'll be glad to hear, that a young and lovely girl is growing into a woman expressly on my account, and is now saving up for me. I thought I'd mention it. I have now merely to apologize for trespassing so long upon your attention. Good night. There is one good thing springing out of all this,' said Richard Swiveller to himself, when he had reached home, and was hanging over the candle with the extinguisher in his hand, 'which is that I now go heart and soul, neck and heels, with Fred in all his schemes about little Nelly, and right glad he'll be to find me so strong upon it. He shall know all about that to-morrow, and in the meantime, as it's rather late, I'll try and get a wink of the Barmy.' The Barmy came almost as soon as it was courted. In a very few minutes Mr Swiveller was fast asleep, dreaming that he had married Nelly Trent and come into the property, and that his first act of power was to lay waste the market garden of Mr Cheggs and turn it into a brick field. End of chapter 8. Chapter 9 of the Old Curiosity Shop. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Nicholson. The Old Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens. Chapter 9. The child, in her confidence with Mrs Quilp, had but feebly described the sadness and sorrow of her thoughts,
or the heaviness of the cloud which overhung her home and cast dark shadows on its hearth. Besides that, it was very difficult to impart to any person not intimately acquainted with the life she led, an adequate sense of its gloom and loneliness. A constant fear of in some way committing or injuring the old man to whom she was so tenderly attached, had restrained her even in the midst of her heart's overflowing, and made her timid of allusion to the main cause of her anxiety and distress. For, it was not the monotonous days unchequered by variety and uncheered by pleasant companionship. It was not the dark dreary evenings, or the long solitary nights. It was not the absence of every slight and easy pleasure for which young hearts beat high, or the knowing nothing of childhood but its weakness and its easily wounded spirit, that had wrung such tears from Nell. To see the old man struck down beneath the pressure of some hidden grief, to mark his wavering and unsettled state, to be agitated at times with a dreadful fear that his mind was wandering, and to trace in his words and looks the dawning of despondent madness. To watch and wait and listen for confirmation of these things day after day, and to feel and know that, come what might, they were alone in the world, with no one to help or advise or care about them. These were causes of depression and anxiety that might have sat heavily on an older breast with many influences at work to cheer and gladden it. But how heavily on the mind of a young child to whom they were ever present, and who was constantly surrounded by all that could keep such thoughts in restless action. And yet, to the old man's vision, Nell was still the same. When he could, for a moment, disengage his mind from the phantom that haunted and brooded on it always, there was his young companion with the same smile for him, the same earnest words, the same merry laugh, the same love and care that, sinking deep into his soul, seemed to have been present to him through his whole life. And so he went on, content to read the book of her heart from the page first presented to him, little dreaming of the story that lay hidden in its other leaves, and murmuring within himself that at least the child was happy. She had been once. She had gone singing through the dim rooms, and moving with gay and lightsome step among their dusty treasures, making them older by her young life, and sterner and more grim by her gay and cheerful presence. But now the chambers were cold and gloomy, and when she left her own little room to while away the tedious hours, and sat in one of them, she was still and motionless as their inanimate occupants, and had no heart to startle the echoes, hoarse from their long silence, with her voice. In one of these rooms was a window looking into the street, where the child sat many and many a long evening, and often far into the night, alone and thoughtful. None are so anxious as those who watch and wait. At these times mournful fancies came flocking on her mind in crowds. She would take her station here at dusk, and watch the people as they passed up and down the street, or appeared at the windows of the opposite houses, wondering whether those rooms were as lonesome as that in which she sat, and whether those people felt it company to see her sitting there, as she did, only to see them look out and draw in their heads again. There was a crooked stack of chimneys on one of the roofs, in which, by often looking at them, she had fancied ugly faces that were frowning over at her and trying to peer into the room, and she felt glad when it grew too dark to make them out, though she was sorry, too, when the man came to light the lamps in the street, for it made it late and very dull inside. Then she would draw in her head to look round the room and see that everything was in its place and hadn't moved, and looking out into the street again would perhaps see a man passing with a coffin on his back, and 2 or 3 others silently following him to a house where somebody lay dead, which made her shudder and think of such things until they suggested afresh the old man's altered face and manner, and a new train of fears and speculations. If he were to die, if sudden illness had happened to him, and he were never to come home again alive, if one night he should come home and kiss and bless her as usual, and after she had gone to bed and had fallen asleep and was perhaps dreaming pleasantly and smiling in her sleep, he should kill himself, and his blood come creeping on the ground to her own bedroom door. These thoughts were too terrible to dwell upon, and again she would have recourse to the street, now trodden by fewer feet and darker and more silent than before. The shops were closing fast, and lights began to shine from the upper windows as the neighbours went to bed. By degrees these dwindled away and disappeared, or were replaced, here and there, by a feeble rush candle which was to burn all night. Still, there was one late shop at no great distance, which sent forth a ruddy glare upon the pavement even yet, and looked bright and companionable. But, in a little time, this closed, the light was extinguished, and all was gloomy and quiet, except when some stray footsteps sounded on the pavement, or a neighbour, out later than his wont, knocked lustily at his house-door to rouse the sleeping inmates. When the night had worn away thus far, and seldom now until it had, the child would close the window and steal softly downstairs, thinking as she went that if one of those hideous faces below, which often mingled with her dreams, were to meet her by the way, rendering itself visible by some strange light of its own, how terrified she would be. But these fears vanished before a well-trimmed lamp and the familiar aspect of her own room. After praying fervently, and with many bursting tears for the old man and the restoration of his peace of mind and the happiness they had once enjoyed, she would lay her head upon the pillow and sob herself to sleep, often starting up again before the daylight came to listen for the bell and respond to the imaginary summons which had roused her from her slumber. One night, the third after Nelly's interview with Mrs Quilp, the old man, who had been weak and ill all day, said he should not leave home. The child's eyes sparkled at the intelligence, but her joy subsided when they reverted to his worn and sickly face. 2 days, he said. 2 whole clear days have passed, and there is no reply. What did he tell thee, Nell?
Exactly what I told you, dear grandfather, indeed.
True, said the old man faintly.
Yes, but tell me again, Nell. My head fails me. What was it that he told thee? Nothing more than that he would see me tomorrow or next day? That was in the note.
Nothing more,
said the child.
Shall I go to him again tomorrow, dear grandfather? Very early. I will be there and back before breakfast.
The old man shook his head, and sighing mournfully, drew her towards him.
'Twould be of no use, my dear, no earthly use. But if he deserts me, Nell, at this moment, if he deserts me now, when I should, with his assistance, be recompensed for all the time and money I have lost, and all the agony of mind I have undergone, which makes me what you see, I am ruined, and worse, far worse than that, have ruined thee, for whom I ventured all. If we are beggars—'
'What if we are?'
said the child boldly.
'Let us be beggars, and be happy.'
'Beggars and happy?' said the old man. 'Poor child!'
'Dear grandfather!'
cried the girl with an energy which shone in her flushed face, trembling voice, and impassioned gesture.
'I am not a child in that, I think. But even if I am, oh, hear me pray that we may beg or work in open roads or fields, to earn a scanty living, rather than live as we do now.'
'Nelly,' said the old man.
'Yes, yes, rather than live as we do now,'
the child repeated, more earnestly than before.
'If you are sorrowful, let me know why, and be sorrowful too. If you waste away and are paler and weaker every day, let me be your nurse and try to comfort you. If you are poor, let us be poor together, but let me be with you. Do let me be with you. Do not let me see such change, and not know why, or I shall break my heart and die. Dear grandfather, let us leave this sad place tomorrow, and beg our way from door to door.'
The old man covered his face with his hands, and hid it in the pillow of the couch on which he lay.
'Let us be beggars,'
said the child, passing an arm round his neck.
'I have no fear, but we shall have enough. I'm sure we shall. Let us walk through country places and sleep in fields and under trees, and never think of money again, or anything that can make you sad, but rest at nights and have the sun and wind upon our faces in the day, and thank God together. Let us never set foot in dark rooms or melancholy houses any more, but wander up and down wherever we like to go, and when you are tired, you shall stop to rest in the pleasantest place that we can find, and I will go and beg for both.' The child's voice was lost in sobs as she dropped upon the old man's neck, nor did she weep alone. These were not words for other ears, nor was it a scene for other eyes, and yet other ears and eyes were there, and greedily taking in all that passed, and moreover they were the ears and eyes of no less a person than Mr. Daniel Quilp, who, having entered unseen when the child first placed herself at the old man's side, refrained, actuated no doubt by motives of the purest delicacy, from interrupting the conversation, and stood looking on with his accustomed grin. Standing, however, being a tiresome attitude to a gentleman already fatigued with walking, and the dwarf being one of that kind of persons who usually make themselves at home, he soon cast his eyes upon a chair, into which he skipped with uncommon agility, and perching himself on the back with his feet upon the seat, was thus enabled to look on and listen with greater comfort to himself, besides gratifying at the same time that taste for doing something fantastic and monkey-like, which on all occasions had strong possession of him. Here then he sat, one leg cocked carelessly over the other, his chin resting on the palm of his hand, his head turned a little on one side, and his ugly features twisted into a complacent grimace. And in this position the old man, happening in course of time to look that way, at length chanced to see him, to his unbounded astonishment. The child uttered a suppressed shriek on beholding this agreeable figure. In their first surprise, both she and the old man, not knowing what to say, and half doubting its reality, looked shrinkingly at it. Not at all disconcerted by this reception, Daniel Quilp preserved the same attitude, merely nodding twice or thrice with great condescension. At length the old man pronounced his name, and inquired how he came there.
"Through the door," said Quilp, pointing over his shoulder with his thumb. "I'm not quite small enough to get through keyholes. I wish I was. I want to have some talk with you, particularly and in private, with nobody present, neighbour. Good-bye, little Nelly."
Nell looked at the old man, who nodded to her to retire, and kissed her cheek.
"Ah," said the dwarf, smacking his lips, "what a nice kiss that was! Just upon the rosy part. What a capital kiss!"
Nell was none the slower in going away for this remark. Quilp looked after her with an admiring leer, and when she had closed the door, fell to complimenting the old man upon her charms.
"Such a fresh, blooming, modest little bud, neighbour," said Quilp, nursing his short leg, and making his eyes twinkle very much. "Such a chubby, rosy, cosy little Nell."
The old man answered by a forced smile, and was plainly struggling with a feeling of the keenest and most exquisite impatience. It was not lost upon Quilp, who delighted in torturing him, or indeed anybody else, when he could.
"She's so," said Quilp, speaking very slowly, and feigning to be quite absorbed in the subject, "so small, so compact, so beautifully modelled, so fair, with such blue veins, and such a transparent skin, and such little feet, and such winning ways. But bless me, you're nervous. Why, neighbour, what's the matter? I swear to you," continued the dwarf, dismounting from the chair and sitting down in it, with a careful slowness of gesture very different from the rapidity with which he had sprung up unheard, "I swear to you that I'd no idea old blood ran so fast or kept so warm. I thought it was sluggish in its course, and cool, quite cool. I'm pretty sure it ought to be. Yours must be out of order, neighbour."
"Ay,
believe it is,' groaned the old man, clasping his head with both hands. 'There's burning fever here, and something now and then, to which I fear to give a name.' The dwarf said never a word, but watched his companion as he paced restlessly up and down the room, and presently returned to his seat. Here he remained with his head bowed upon his breast for some time, and then suddenly raising it, said, 'Once, and once for all, have you brought me any money?'
'No,'
returned Quilp. 'Then,' said the old man, clenching his hands desperately, and looking upwards, 'the child and I are lost.'
'Neighbour,'
said Quilp, glancing sternly at him, and beating his hand twice or thrice upon the table to attract his wandering attention,
'let me be plain with you, and play a fairer game than when you held all the cards, and I saw but the backs and nothing more. You have no secret from me now.'
The old man looked up, trembling.
'You are surprised?' said Quilp. 'Well, perhaps that's natural. You have no secret from me now. I say, no, not one. For now I know that all those sums of money, that all those loans, advances, and supplies that you have had from me, have found their way to— shall I say the word?'
'Aye,' replied the old man. 'Say it, if you will.'
'To the gaming table,' rejoined Quilp. 'Your nightly haunt. This was the precious scheme to make your fortune, was it? This was the secret certain source of wealth in which I was to have sunk my money, if I had been the fool you took me for? This was your inexhaustible mine of gold, your El Dorado, eh?'
'Yes,' cried the old man, turning upon him with gleaming eyes. 'It was. It is. It will be till I die.'
'That I should have been blinded,' said Quilp, looking contemptuously at him, 'by a mere shallow gambler.'
'I am no gambler,' cried the old man fiercely. 'I call Heaven to witness that I never played for gain of mine, or love of play, and that at every piece I staked I whispered to myself that orphan's name, and called on Heaven to bless the venture, which it never did. Whom did it prosper? Who were those with whom I played? Men who lived by plunder, profligacy, and riot, squandering their gold in doing ill and propagating vice and evil. My winnings would have been from them. My winnings would have been bestowed to the last farthing on a young sinless child, whose life they would have sweetened and made happy. What would they have contracted? The means of corruption, wretchedness, and misery. Who would not have hoped in such a cause? Tell me that. Who would not have hoped as I did?
'When did you first begin this mad career?' asked Quilp, his taunting inclination subdued for a moment by the old man's grief and wildness. 'When did I first begin?' he rejoined, passing his hand across his brow. 'When was it that I first began? When should it be but when I began to think how little I had saved, how long a time it took to save at all, how short a time I might have at my age to live, and how she would be left to the rough mercies of the world, with barely enough to keep her from the sorrows that wait on poverty? Then it was that I began to think about it.' 'After you first came to me to get your precious grandson packed off to sea?' said Quilp.
'Shortly after that,' replied the old man. 'I thought of it a long time, and had it in my sleep for months. Then I began. I found no pleasure in it, I expected none. What has it ever brought me but anxious days and sleepless nights? But loss of health and peace of mind, and gain of feebleness and sorrow. You lost what money you had laid by first, and then came to me. While I thought you were making your fortune, as you said you were making yourself a beggar, eh? Dear me! And so it comes to pass that I hold every security you could scrape together, and a bill of sale upon the stock and property,' said Quilp, standing up and looking about him, as if to assure himself that none of it had been taken away. 'But did you never win?'
'Never,' groaned the old man. 'Never won back my loss.'
'I thought,' sneered the dwarf, 'that if a man played long enough, he was sure to win at last, or, at the worst, not to come off a loser.'
'And so he is!' cried the old man, suddenly rousing himself from his state of despondency, and lashed into the most violent excitement. 'So he is! I have felt that from the first. I've always known it. I've seen it. I never felt it half so strong as I feel it now. Quilp, I have dreamed 3 nights of winning the same large sum. I never could dream that dream before, though I have often tried. Do not desert me now. I have this chance. I have no resource but you. Give me some help. Let me try this one last hope.' The dwarf shrugged his shoulders and shook his head. 'See, Quilp, good tender-hearted Quilp,' said the old man, drawing some scraps of paper from his pocket with a trembling hand, and clasping the dwarf's arm. 'Only see here. Look at these figures, the result of long calculation and painful and hard experience. I must win. I only want a little help once more. A few pounds, but 20 pounds, dear Quilp.'
'The last advance was 70, said the dwarf, 'and it went in one night.'
'I know it did,' answered the old man, 'but that was the very worst fortune of all, and the time had not come then. Quilp, consider, consider!' the old man cried, trembling so much the while that the papers in his hand fluttered as if they were shaken by the wind. 'That orphan child! If I were alone, I could die with gladness, perhaps even anticipate that doom which is dealt out so unequally, coming as it does on the proud and happy in their strength, and shunning the needy and afflicted and all who court it in their despair. But what I have done has been for her. Help me for her sake, I implore you, not for mine, for hers.'
'I'm sorry I've got an appointment in the city,' said Quilp, looking at his watch with perfect self-possession, 'or I should have been very glad to have spent half an hour with you while you composed yourself. Very glad.'
'Nay, Quilp, good Quilp,' grasped the old man, catching at his skirts, 'you and I have talked together more than once of her poor mother's story. The fear of her coming to poverty has perhaps been bred in me by that. Do not be hard upon me, but take that into account. You are a great gainer by me. Oh, spare me the money for this one last hope.'
'I couldn't do it, really,' said Quilp with unusual politeness. 'Though I tell you what, and this is a circumstance worth bearing in mind, as showing how the sharpest among us may be taken in sometimes, I was so deceived by the penurious way in which you lived, alone with Nelly.'
'All done to save money for tempting fortune, and to make her triumph greater,' cried the old man.
'Yes, yes, I understand that now,' said Quilp. 'But I was going to say, I was so deceived by that, your miserly way, the reputation you had among those who knew you of being rich, and your repeated assurances that you would make of my advances treble and quadruple the interest you paid me, that I'd have advanced you even now what you want on your simple note of hand, if I hadn't unexpectedly become acquainted with your secret way of life.'
'Who is it?' retorted the old man desperately.
that, notwithstanding all my caution, told you. Come, let me know the name, the person.' The crafty dwarf, bethinking himself that his giving up the child would lead to the disclosure of the artifice he had employed, which, as nothing was to be gained by it, it was well to conceal, stopped short in his answer, and said, 'Now, who do you think?' 'It was Kit. It must have been the boy. He played the spy, and you tampered with him,' said the old man.
'How came you to think of him?' said the dwarf in a tone of great commiseration. 'Yes, it was Kit. Poor Kit.'
So saying, he nodded in a friendly manner and took his leave, stopping when he had passed the outer door a little distance, and grinning with extraordinary delight.
'Poor Kit,'
muttered Quilp.
'I think it was Kit who said I was an uglier dwarf than could be seen anywhere for a penny, wasn't it? Poor Kit.'
And with that he went his way, still chuckling as he went. End of chapter 9. Chapter 10 of the Old Curiosity Shop. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Nicholson. The Old Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens. Chapter 10. Daniel Quilp neither entered nor left the old man's house unobserved. In the shadow of an archway nearly opposite, leading to one of the many passages which diverged from the main street, there lingered one who, having taken up his position when the twilight first came on, still maintained it with undiminished patience, and leaning against the wall with the manner of a person who had a long time to wait, and being well used to it, was quite resigned, scarcely changed his attitude for the hour together. This patient lounger attracted little attention from any of those who passed, and bestowed as little upon them. His eyes were constantly directed towards one object, the window at which the child was accustomed to sit. If he withdrew them for a moment, it was only to glance at a clock in some neighbouring shop, and then to strain his sight once more in the old quarter with increased earnestness and attention. It had been remarked that this personage evinced no weariness in his place of concealment, nor did he, long as his waiting was. But as the time went on, he manifested some anxiety and surprise, glancing at the clock more frequently and at the window less hopefully than before. At length the clock was hidden from his sight by some envious shutters. Then the church steeples proclaimed 11 at night. Then the quarter past, and then the conviction seemed to obtrude itself on his mind that it was no use tarrying there any longer. That the conviction was an unwelcome one, and that he was by no means willing to yield to it, was apparent from his reluctance to quit the spot, from the tardy steps with which he often left it, still looking over his shoulder at the same window, and from the precipitation with which he has often returned when a fancied noise or the changing and imperfect light induced him to suppose it had been softly raised. At length he gave the matter up, as hopeless for that night, and suddenly breaking into a run as though to force himself away, scampered off at his utmost speed, nor once ventured to look behind him lest he should be tempted back again. Without relaxing his pace, or stopping to take breath, this mysterious individual dashed on through a great many alleys and narrow ways until he at length arrived in a square paved court, when he subsided into a walk, and making for a small house from the window of which a light was shining, lifted the latch of the door and passed in.
'Bless us!'
cried a woman, turning sharply round.
'Who's that?'
'Oh, it's you, Kit!'
'Yes, mother, it's me.'
'Why, how tired you look, my dear!'
'Old master ain't gone out to-night,' said Kit, 'and so she hasn't been at the window at all.'
With which words he sat down by the fire, and looked very mournful and discontented. The room in which Kit sat himself down, in this condition, was an extremely poor and homely place, but with that air of comfort about it, nevertheless, which, or the spot must be a wretched one indeed, cleanliness and order can always impart in some degree. Late as the Dutch clock showed it to be, the poor woman was still hard at work at an ironing table. A young child lay sleeping in a cradle near the fire, and another, a sturdy boy of 2 or 3 years old, very wide awake, with a very tight nightcap on his head, and a nightgown very much too small for him on his body, was sitting bolt upright in a clothes basket, staring over the rim with his great round eyes, and looking as if he had thoroughly made up his mind never to go to sleep any more, which, as he had already declined to take his natural rest and had been brought out of bed in consequence, opened a cheerful prospect for his relations and friends. It was rather a queer-looking family, Kit, his mother, and the children being all strongly alike. Kit was disposed to be out of temper, as the best of us are too often. But he looked at the youngest child, who was sleeping soundly, and from him to his other brother in the clothes-basket, and from him to their mother, who had been at work without complaint since morning, and thought it would be a better and kinder thing to be good-humoured. So he rocked the cradle with his foot, made a face at the rebel in the clothes-basket, which put him in high good humour directly, and stoutly determined to be talkative and make himself agreeable. "Ah, mother," said Kit, taking out his clasp-knife and falling upon a great piece of bread and meat which she had had ready for him hours before, "what a one you are! There ain't many such as you, I know." "I hope there are many a great deal better, Kit," said Mrs Nubbles, "and that there are, or ought to be, according to what the parson at the chapel says." "Much he knows about it," returned Kit contemptuously. "Wait till he's a widder, and works like you do, and gets as little, and does as much, and keeps his spirit up the same, and then I'll ask him what's o'clock, and trust him for being right to half a second." "Well," said Mrs Nubbles, evading the point, "your beer's down there by the fender, Kit." "I see," replied her son, taking up the porter-pot. "My love to you, mother, and the parson's health too, if you like. I don't bear him any malice, not I." "Did you tell me just now that your master hasn't gone out to-night?" inquired Mrs Nubbles. "Yes," said Kit. "Worse luck." "You should say better luck, I think," returned his mother, "because Miss Nelly won't have been left alone." "Ah!" said Kit. "I forgot that. I said worse luck, because I've been watching ever since 8 o'clock, and seen nothing of her." "I wonder what she'd say," cried his mother, stopping in her work and looking round, "if she knew that every night, when she, poor thing, is sitting alone at that window, you are watching in the open street for fear any harm should come to her, and that you never leave the place or come home to your bed, though you're ever so tired, till such time as you think she's safe in hers." "Never mind what she say," replied Kit, with something like a blush on his uncouth face. "She'll never know nothing, and consequently she'll never say nothing." Mrs Nubbles ironed away in silence for a minute or two, and coming to the fireplace for another iron, glanced stealthily at Kit while she rubbed it on a board and dusted it with a duster, but said nothing until she had returned to her table again, when, holding the iron at an alarmingly short distance from her cheek to test its temperature, and looking round with a smile, she observed, "I know what some people would say, Kit." "Nonsense!" interposed Kit, with a perfect apprehension of what was to follow. "No, but they would indeed. Some people would say that you'd fallen in love with her. I know they would." To this Kit only replied by bashfully bidding his mother "Get out!" and forming sundry strange figures with his legs and arms, accompanied by sympathetic contortions of his face. Not deriving from these means the relief which he sought, he bit off an immense mouthful from the bread and meat, and took a quick drink of the porter, by which artificial aids he choked himself, and effected a diversion of the subject. "Speaking seriously though, Kit," said his mother, taking up the theme afresh after a time, "for of course I was only in joke just now, it's very good and thoughtful and like you
to do this, and never let anybody know it, though some day I hope she may come to know it, for I'm sure she'll be very grateful to you and feel it very much. It's a cruel thing to keep the dear child shut up there. I don't wonder that the old gentleman wants to keep it from you.' 'He don't think it's cruel, bless you,' said Kit, 'and don't mean it to be so, or he wouldn't do it. I do consider, mother, that he wouldn't do it for all the gold and silver in the world. No, no, that he wouldn't. I know him better than that.' 'Then what does he do it for? And why does he keep it so close from you?' said Mrs Nubbles. 'That I don't know,' returned her son. 'If he hadn't tried to keep it so close, though, I should never have found it out, for it was his getting me away at night and sending me off so much earlier than he used to, that first made me curious to know what was going on. Hark! What's that?' 'It's only somebody outside. It's somebody crossing over here,' said Kit, standing up to listen, 'and coming very fast too. He can't have gone out after I left, and the house caught fire, mother.' The boy stood for a moment, really bereft, by the apprehension he had conjured up, of the power to move. The footsteps drew nearer, the door was opened with a hasty hand, and the child herself, pale and breathless and hastily wrapped in a few disordered garments, hurried into the room. 'Miss Nelly, what is the matter?' cried mother and son together. 'I must not stay a moment,' she returned. 'Grandfather has been taken very ill. I found him in a fit upon the floor.' 'I'll run for a doctor,' said Kit, seizing his brimless hat. 'I'll be there directly. I'll—' 'No, no,' cried Nell. 'There is one there. You're not wanted. You must never come near us any more.' 'What?' roared Kit. 'Never again,' said the child. 'Don't ask me why, for I don't know. Pray don't ask me why. Pray don't be sorry. Pray don't be vexed with me. I have nothing to do with it, indeed.' Kit looked at her with his eyes stretched wide, and opened and shut his mouth a great many times, but couldn't get out one word. 'He complains and raves of you,' said the child. 'I don't know what you have done, but I hope it's nothing very bad.' 'I done?' roared Kit. 'He cries that you're the cause of all his misery,' returned the child with tearful eyes. 'He screamed and called for you. They say you must not come near him, or he will die. You must not return to us any more. I came to tell you. I thought it would be better that I should come, and somebody quite strange. Oh, Kit, what have you done? You, in whom I trusted so much, and who were almost the only friend I had.' The unfortunate Kit looked at his young mistress harder and harder, and with eyes growing wider and wider, but was perfectly motionless and silent. 'I have brought his money for the week,' said the child, looking to the woman and laying it on the table, 'and a little more, for he was always good and kind to me. I hope he will be sorry, and do well somewhere else, and not take this to heart too much. It grieves me very much to part with him like this, but there is no help. It must be done. Good night.' With the tears streaming down her face, and her slight figure trembling with the agitation of the scene she had left, the shock she had received, the errand she had just discharged, and 1,000 painful and affectionate feelings, the child hastened to the door, and disappeared as rapidly as she had come. The poor woman, who had no cause to doubt her son, but every reason for relying on his honesty and truth, was staggered, notwithstanding, by his not having advanced one word in his defence. Visions of gallantry, knavery, robbery, and of the nightly absences from home for which he had accounted so strangely, having been occasioned by some unlawful pursuit, flocked into her brain and rendered her afraid to question him. She rocked herself upon a chair, wringing her hands and weeping bitterly. But Kit made no attempt to comfort her, and remained quite bewildered. The baby in the cradle woke up and cried. The boy in the clothes basket fell over on his back with the basket upon him, and was seen no more. The mother wept louder yet, and rocked faster. But Kit,
insensible to all the din and tumult, remained in a state of utter stupefaction. End of chapter 10. Chapter 11 of the Old Curiosity Shop. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Nicholson. The Old Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens. Chapter 11. Quiet and solitude were destined to hold uninterrupted rule no longer beneath the roof that sheltered the child. Next morning the old man was in a raging fever accompanied with delirium, and sinking under the influence of this disorder, he lay for many weeks in imminent peril of his life. There was watching enough now, but it was the watching of strangers, who made a greedy trade of it, and who, in the intervals in their attendance upon the sick man, huddled together with a ghastly good fellowship, and ate and drank and made merry, for disease and death were their ordinary household gods. Yet in all the hurry and crowding of such a time, the child was more alone than she had ever been before. Alone in spirit, alone in her devotion to him who was wasting away upon his burning bed, alone in her unfeigned sorrow and her unpurchased sympathy. Day after day, and night after night, found her still by the pillow of the unconscious sufferer, still anticipating his every want, still listening to those repetitions of her name and those anxieties and cares for her, which were ever uppermost among his feverish wanderings. The house was no longer theirs. Even the sick chamber seemed to be retained on the uncertain tenure of Mr Quilp's favour. The old man's illness had not lasted many days when he took formal possession of the premises, and all upon them, in virtue of certain legal powers to that effect, which few understood and none presumed to call in question. This important step secured, with the assistance of a man of law whom he brought with him for the purpose, the dwarf proceeded to establish himself and his coadjutor in the house, as an assertion of his claim against all comers, and then set about making his quarters comfortable after his own fashion. To this end, Mr Quilp encamped in the back parlour, having first put an effectual stop to any further business by shutting up the shop. Having looked out from among the old furniture, the handsomest and most commodious chair he could possibly find, which he reserved for his own use, and an especially hideous and uncomfortable one, which he considerately appropriated to the accommodation of his friend, he caused them to be carried into this room, and took up his position in great state. The apartment was very far removed from the old man's chamber, but Mr Quilp deemed it prudent, as a precaution against infection from fever, and a means of wholesome fumigation, not only to smoke himself without cessation, but to insist upon it that his legal friend did the like. Moreover, he sent an express to the wharf for the tumbling boy, who, arriving with all dispatch, was enjoined to sit himself down in another chair just inside the door, continually to smoke a great pipe which the dwarf had provided for the purpose, and to take it from his lips under any pretence whatever, were it only for 1 minute at a time if he dared. These arrangements completed, Mr Quilp looked round him with chuckling satisfaction, and remarked that he called that comfort. The legal gentleman, whose melodious name was Brass, might have called it comfort also, but for 2 drawbacks. One was, that he could by no exertion sit easy in his chair, the seat of which was very hard, angular, slippery, and sloping. The other, that tobacco smoke always caused him great internal discomposure and annoyance. But as he was quite a creature of Mr Quilp's, and had 1,000 reasons for conciliating his good opinion, he tried to smile, and nodded his acquiescence with the best grace he could assume. This Brass was an attorney of no very good repute, from Bevis Marks in the city of London. He was a tall, meagre man with a nose like a wen, a protruding forehead, retreating eyes, and hair of a deep red. He wore a long black surtout reaching nearly to his ankles, short black trousers, high shoes, and cotton stockings of a bluish grey. He had a cringing manner, but a very harsh voice, and his blandest smiles were so extremely forbidding that to have had his company under the least repulsive circumstances one would have wished him to be out of temper that he might only scowl. Quilp looked at his legal adviser, and seeing that he was winking very much in the anguish of his pipe, that he sometimes shuddered when he happened to inhale its full flavour, and that he constantly fanned the smoke from him, was quite overjoyed, and rubbed his hands with glee.
"Smoke away, you dog," said Quilp, turning to the boy. "Fill your pipe again, and smoke it fast, down to the last whiff, or I'll put the sealing-waxed end of it in the fire and rub it hot upon your tongue."
Luckily the boy was case-hardened, and would have smoked a small lime-kiln if anybody had treated him with it. Wherefore he only muttered a brief defiance of his master, and did as he was ordered.
"Is it good, Brass? Is it nice? Is it fragrant? Do you feel like the Grand Turk?" said Quilp.
Mr Brass thought that if he did, the Grand Turk's feelings were by no means to be envied, but he said it was famous, and he had no doubt he felt very like that potentate.
"This is the way to keep off fever," said Quilp. "This is the way to keep off every calamity of life. We'll never leave off, all the time we stop here. Smoke away, you dog, or you shall swallow the pipe." "Shall we stop here long, Mr Quilp?"
inquired his legal friend, when the dwarf had given his boy this gentle admonition.
"We must stop, I suppose, till the old gentleman upstairs is dead," returned Quilp.
laughed Mr Brass.
"Oh, very good. Smoke away," cried Quilp. "Never stop. You can talk as you smoke. Don't lose time."
cried Brass faintly, as he again applied himself to the odious pipe.
"But if he should get better, Mr Quilp, then we shall stop till he does, and no longer," returned the dwarf. "How kind it is of you, sir, to wait till then," said Brass. "Some people, sir, would have sold or removed the goods, oh dear, the very instant the law allowed them. Some people, sir, would have been all flintiness and granite. Some people, sir, would have spared themselves the jabbering of such a parrot as you," interposed the dwarf. cried Brass. "You have such spirits." The smoking sentinel at the door interposed in this place, and without taking his pipe from his lips, growled, "Is the gal a coming down?" "The what, you dog?" said Quilp. "The gal," returned the boy. "Are you deaf?" "Oh," said Quilp, drawing in his breath with great relish, as if he were taking soup. "You and I will have such a settling presently. There's such a scratching and bruising in store for you, my dear young friend. Aha, Nelly! How is he now, my duck of diamonds?"
"He's very bad," replied the weeping child.
"What a pretty little Nell!" cried Quilp. "Oh, beautiful, sir, beautiful indeed," said Brass. "Quite charming." "Has she come to sit upon Quilp's knee?" said the dwarf, in what he meant to be a soothing tone. "Or is she going to bed in her own little room inside here? Which is poor Nelly going to do?" "What a remarkable pleasant way he has with children," muttered Brass, as if in confidence between himself and the ceiling.
Upon my word, it's quite a treat to hear him.' 'I'm not going to stay at all,' faltered Nell. I want a few things out of that room, and then I won't come down here any more.' 'And a very nice little room it is,' said the dwarf, looking into it as the child entered. 'Quite a bower. You're sure you're not going to use it? You're sure you're not coming back, Nelly?' 'No,' replied the child, hurrying away with the few articles of dress she had come to remove. 'Never again. Never again.' 'She's very sensitive,' said Quilp, looking after her. 'Very sensitive. That's a pity. The bedstead is much about my size. I think I shall make it my little room.'
Mr Brass, encouraging this idea, as he would have encouraged any other emanating from the same source, the dwarf walked in to try the effect. This he did by throwing himself on his back upon the bed, with his pipe in his mouth, and then kicking up his legs and smoking violently. Mr Brass applauding this picture very much, and the bed being soft and comfortable, Mr Quilp determined to use it both as a sleeping place by night and as a kind of divan by day, and in order that it might be converted to the latter purpose at once, remained where he was and smoked his pipe out. The legal gentleman being by this time rather giddy and perplexed in his ideas, for this was one of the operations of the tobacco on his nervous system, took the opportunity of slinking away into the open air, where, in course of time, he recovered sufficiently to return with a countenance of tolerable composure. He was soon led on by the malicious dwarf to smoke himself into a relapse, and in that state stumbled upon a settee, where he slept till morning. Such were Mr Quilp's first proceedings on entering upon his new property. He was for some days restrained by business from performing any particular pranks, as his time was pretty well occupied between taking, with the assistance of Mr Brass, a minute inventory of all the goods in the place, and going abroad upon his other concerns, which happily engaged him for several hours at a time. His avarice and caution being now thoroughly awakened, however, he was never absent from the house one night, and his eagerness for some termination, good or bad, to the old man's disorder, increasing rapidly as the time passed by, soon began to vent itself in open murmurs and exclamations of impatience. Nell shrank timidly from all the dwarf's advances towards conversation, and fled from the very sound of his voice, nor were the lawyer's smiles less terrible to her than Quilp's grimaces. She lived in such continual dread and apprehension of meeting one or other of them on the stairs or in the passages if she stirred from her grandfather's chamber, that she seldom left it, for a moment, until late at night, when the silence encouraged her to venture forth and breathe the purer air of some empty room. One night she had stolen to her usual window, and was sitting there very sorrowfully, for the old man had been worse that day, when she thought she heard her name pronounced by a voice in the street. Looking down, she recognized Kit, whose endeavours to attract her attention had roused her from her sad reflections. 'Miss Nell,' said the boy in a low voice. 'Yes,' replied the child, doubtful whether she ought to hold any communication with the supposed culprit, but inclining to her old favourite still. 'What do you want?' 'I have wanted to say a word to you for a long time,' the boy replied, 'but the people below have driven me away and wouldn't let me see you. You don't believe, I hope you don't really believe, that I deserve to be cast off as I have been, do you, miss?' 'I must believe it,' returned the child, 'or why would grandfather have been so angry with you?' 'I don't know,' replied Kit. 'I'm sure I never deserved it from him, no, nor from you. I can say that with a true and honest heart, anyway. And then to be driven from the door when I only came to ask how old master was.' 'They never told me that,' said the child.
I didn't know it indeed. I wouldn't have had them do it for the world. Thank ye, miss, returned Kit. It's comfortable to hear you say that. I said I never would believe that it was your doing. That was right, said the child eagerly. Miss Nell, cried the boy, coming under the window and speaking in a lower tone, there are new masters downstairs. It's a change for you. It is indeed, replied the child. And so it will be for him when he gets better, said the boy, pointing towards the sick room. If he ever does, added the child, unable to restrain her tears. Oh, he'll do that, he'll do that, said Kit. I'm sure he will. You mustn't be cast down, Miss Nell. Now, don't be, pray. These words of encouragement and consolation were few and roughly said, but they affected the child and made her, for the moment, weep the more. He'll be sure to get better now, said the boy anxiously, if you don't give way to low spirits and turn ill yourself, which would make him worse and throw him back just as he was recovering. When he does, say a good word, say a kind word for me, Miss Nell. They tell me I must not even mention your name to him for a long, long time, rejoined the child. I dare not, and even if I might, what good would a kind word do you, Kit? We shall be very poor. We shall scarcely have bread to eat. It's not that I may be taken back, said the boy, that I ask the favour of you. It isn't for the sake of food and wages that I've been waiting about so long in hopes to see you. Don't think that I'd come in a time of trouble to talk of such things as them. The child looked gratefully and kindly at him, but waited that he might speak again. No, it's not that, said Kit, hesitating. It's something very different from that. I haven't got much sense, I know, but if he could be brought to believe that I'd been a faithful servant to him, doing the best I could and never meaning harm, perhaps he mightn't. Here Kit faltered so long that the child entreated him to speak out, and quickly, for it was very late and time to shut the window. Perhaps he mightn't think it over-venturesome of me to say, well then, to say this, cried Kit with sudden boldness. This home is gone from you and him. Mother and I have got a poor one, but that's better than this with all these people here. And why not come there, till he's had time to look about, and find a better? The child did not speak. Kit, in the relief of having made his proposition, found his tongue loosened, and spoke out in its favour with his utmost eloquence. You think, said the boy, that it's very small and inconvenient. So it is, but it's very clean. Perhaps you think it would be noisy, but there's not a quieter court than ours in all the town. Don't be afraid of the children. The baby hardly ever cries, and the other one is very good. Besides, I'd mind 'em. They wouldn't vex you much, I'm sure. Do try, Miss Nell, do try. The little front room upstairs is very pleasant. You can see a piece of the church clock through the chimneys, and almost tell the time. Mother says it would be just the thing for you, and so it would, and you'd have her to wait upon you both, and me to run of errands. We don't mean money, bless you. You're not to think of that. Will you try him, Miss Nell? Only say you'll try him. Do try to make old master come, and ask him first what I have done. Will you only promise that, Miss Nell? Before the child could reply to this earnest solicitation, the street door opened, and Mr Brass, thrusting out his night-capped head, called in a surly voice, "Who's there?" Kit immediately glided away, and Nell, closing the window softly, drew back into the room. Before Mr Brass had repeated his inquiry many times, Mr Quilp, also embellished with a nightcap, emerged from the same door, and looked carefully up and down the street,
and up at all the windows of the house from the opposite side. Finding that there was nobody in sight, he presently returned into the house with his legal friend, protesting, as the child heard from the staircase, that there was a league and plot against him, that he was in danger of being robbed and plundered by a band of conspirators who prowled about the house at all seasons, and that he would delay no longer but take immediate steps for disposing of the property, and returning to his own peaceful roof. Having growled forth these and a great many other threats of the same nature, he called himself once more in the child's little bed, and Nell crept softly up the stairs. It was natural enough that her short and unfinished dialogue with Kit should leave a strong impression on her mind, and influence her dreams that night and her recollections for a long, long time. Surrounded by unfeeling creditors and mercenary attendants upon the sick, and meeting in the height of her anxiety and sorrow with little regard or sympathy even from the women about her, it is not surprising that the affectionate heart of the child should have been touched to the quick by one kind and generous spirit, however uncouth the temple in which it dwelt. Thank Heaven that the temples of such spirits are not made with hands, and that they may be even more worthily hung with poor patchwork than with purple and fine linen. End of chapter 11. Chapter 12 of the Old Curiosity Shop. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Nicholson. The Old Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens. Chapter 12. At length the crisis of the old man's disorder was past, and he began to mend. By very slow and feeble degrees his consciousness came back, but the mind was weakened and its functions were impaired. He was patient and quiet, often sat brooding, but not despondently, for a long space, was easily amused, even by a sunbeam on the wall or ceiling, made no complaint that the days were long or the nights tedious, and appeared indeed to have lost all count of time and every sense of care or weariness. He would sit for hours together, with Nell's small hand in his, playing with the fingers and stopping sometimes to smooth her hair or kiss her brow, and, when he saw that tears were glistening in her eyes, would look amazed about him for the cause, and forget his wonder even while he looked. The child and he rode out, the old man propped up with pillows, and the child beside him. They were hand in hand as usual. The noise and motion in the streets fatigued his brain at first, but he was not surprised, or curious, or pleased, or irritated. He was asked if he remembered this or that. "Oh, yes," he said, "quite well. Why not?" Sometimes he turned his head and looked with earnest gaze and outstretched neck after some stranger in the crowd, until he disappeared from sight, but to the question why he did this, he answered not a word. He was sitting in his easy-chair one day, and Nell upon a stool beside him, when a man outside the door inquired if he might enter. "Yes," he said without emotion. It was Quilp, he knew. Quilp was master there. Of course he might come in. And so he did.
"I'm glad to see you well again at last, neighbour," said the dwarf, sitting down opposite him. "You're quite strong now."
"Yes," said the old man feebly. "Yes."
"I don't want to hurry you, you know, neighbour,"
said the dwarf, raising his voice, for the old man's senses were duller than they had been.
"but as soon as you can arrange your future proceedings, the better."
"Surely," said the old man, "the better for all parties."
"You see," pursued Quilp after a short pause, "the goods being once removed, this house would be uncomfortable, uninhabitable, in fact."
"You say true," returned the old man. "Poor Nell too. What would she do?"
"Exactly. bawled the dwarf, nodding his head. "That's very well observed. Then will you consider about it, neighbour?"
Will, certainly," replied the old man. "We shall not stop here."
"So I supposed," said the dwarf. "I have sold the things. They have not yielded quite as much as they might have done, but pretty well, pretty well. Today's Tuesday. When shall they be moved? There's no hurry. Shall we say this afternoon?"
"Say Friday morning," returned the old man.
"Very good," said the dwarf. "So be it, with the understanding that I can't go beyond that day, neighbour, on any account."
"Good," returned the old man. "I shall remember it." Mr Quilp seemed rather puzzled by the strange, even spiritless way in which all this was said, but as the old man nodded his head and repeated, "On Friday morning, I shall remember it," he had no excuse for dwelling on the subject any further, and so took a friendly leave, with many expressions of goodwill and many compliments to his friend on his looking so remarkably well, and went below stairs to report progress to Mr Brass. All that day and all the next, the old man remained in this state. He wandered up and down the house, and into and out of the various rooms, as if with some vague intent of bidding them adieu, but he referred neither by direct allusions nor in any other manner to the interview of the morning, or the necessity of finding some other shelter. An indistinct idea he had that the child was desolate and in want of help, for he often drew her to his bosom and bade her be of good cheer, saying that they would not desert each other, but he seemed unable to contemplate their real position more distinctly, and was still the listless, passionless creature that suffering of mind and body had left him. We call this a state of childishness, but it is the same poor hollow mockery of it that death is of sleep. Where, in the dull eyes of doting men, are the laughing light and life of childhood, the gaiety that has known no check, the frankness that has felt no chill, the hope that has never withered, the joys that fade in blossoming? Where in the sharp lineaments of rigid and unsightly death is the calm beauty of slumber, telling of rest for the waking hours that are past, and gentle hopes and loves for those which are to come? Lay death and sleep down side by side, and say who shall find the two akin. Send forth the child and childish man together, and blush for the pride that libels our own old happy state, and give its title to an ugly and distorted image. Thursday arrived, and there was no alteration in the old man, but a change came upon him that evening as he and the child sat silently together. In a small dull yard below his window there was a tree, green and flourishing enough for such a place, and as the air stirred among its leaves, it threw a rippling shadow on the white wall. The old man sat watching the shadows as they trembled in this patch of light, until the sun went down, and when it was night and the moon was slowly rising, he still sat in the same spot. To one who had been tossing on a restless bed so long, even these few green leaves and this tranquil light, although it languished among chimneys and housetops, were pleasant things. They suggested quiet places afar off, and rest, and peace. The child thought more than once that he was moved, and had forborne to speak, but now he shed tears, tears that it lightened her aching heart to see, and making as though he would fall upon his knees, besought her to forgive him.
"Forgive you? What?"
said Nell, interposing to prevent his purpose.
"Oh, grandfather, what should I forgive?"
"All that is past, all that has come upon thee, Nell, all that was done in that uneasy dream," returned the old man.
"Do not talk so," said the child. "Pray do not. Let us speak of something else."
"Yes, yes, we will," he rejoined. "And it shall be of what we talked of long ago, many months. Months, is it?
or weeks, or days? Which is it, Nell?'
'I do not understand you,' said the child.
'It has come back upon me to-day. It has all come back since we have been sitting here. I bless thee for it, Nell.'
'For what, dear grandfather?'
'For what you said when we were first made beggars, Nell. Let us speak softly. Hush! For if they knew our purpose downstairs, they would cry that I was mad, and take thee from me. We will not stop here another day. We will go far away from here.'
'Yes, let us go,' said the child earnestly. 'Let us be gone from this place, and never turn back or think of it again. Let us wander barefoot through the world, rather than linger here.'
'We will,' answered the old man.
'We will travel afoot through the fields and woods, and by the side of rivers,
and trust ourselves to God in the places where He dwells. It is far better to lie down at night beneath an open sky like that yonder, see how bright it is, than to rest in closed rooms which are always full of care and weary dreams. Thou and I together, Nell, may be cheerful and happy yet, and learn to forget this time as if it had never been.'
'We will be happy,' cried the child. 'We never can be here.'
'No, we never can again, never again. That's truly said,' rejoined the old man. 'Let us steal away to-morrow morning, early and softly, that we may not be seen or heard, and leave no trace or track for them to follow by. Poor Nell! Thy cheek is pale, and thy eyes are heavy with watching and weeping for me, I know, for me. But thou wilt be well again, and merry too, when we are far away. To-morrow morning, dear, we'll turn our faces from this scene of sorrow, and be as free and happy as the birds.' And then the old man clasped his hands above her head, and said in a few broken words, that from that time forth they would wander up and down together, and never part more until death took one or other of the twain. The child's heart beat high with hope and confidence. She had no thought of hunger, or cold, or thirst, or suffering. She saw in this but a return of the simple pleasures they had once enjoyed, a relief from the gloomy solitude in which she had lived, an escape from the heartless people by whom she had been surrounded in her late time of trial, the restoration of the old man's health and peace, and a life of tranquil happiness. Sun, and stream, and meadow, and summer days shone brightly in her view, and there was no dark tint in all the sparkling picture. The old man had slept for some hours, soundly in his bed, and she was yet busily engaged in preparing for their flight. There were a few articles of clothing for herself to carry, and a few for him, old garments, such as became their fallen fortunes, laid out to wear, and a staff to support his feeble steps, put ready for his use. But this was not all her task, for now she must visit the old rooms for the last time. And how different the parting with them was from any she had expected, and most of all from that which she had oftenest pictured to herself. How could she ever have thought of bidding them farewell in triumph, when the recollection of the many hours she had passed among them rose to her swelling heart, and made her feel the wish a cruelty, lonely and sad though many of those hours had been? She sat down at the window where she had spent so many evenings, darker far than this, and every thought of hope or cheerfulness that had occurred to her in that place came vividly upon her mind, and blotted out all its dull and mournful associations in an instant. Her own little room too, where she had so often knelt down and prayed at night, prayed for the time which she hoped was dawning now, the little room where she had slept so peacefully and dreamed such pleasant dreams. It was hard not to be able to glance round it once more, and to be forced to leave it without one kind look or grateful tear. There were some trifles there,
poor useless things, that she would have liked to take away, but that was impossible. This brought to mind her bird, her poor bird, who hung there yet. She wept bitterly for the loss of this little creature, until the idea occurred to her, she did not know how or why it came into her head, that it might, by some means, fall into the hands of Kit, who would keep it for her sake, and think, perhaps, that she had left it behind in the hope that he might have it, and as an assurance that she was grateful to him. She was calmed and comforted by the thought, and went to rest with a lighter heart. From many dreams of rambling through light and sunny places, but with some vague object unattained which ran indistinctly through them all, she awoke to find that it was yet night, and that the stars were shining brightly in the sky. At length the day began to glimmer, and the stars to grow pale and dim. As soon as she was sure of this, she arose and dressed herself for the journey. The old man was yet asleep, and as she was unwilling to disturb him, she left him to slumber on until the sun rose. He was anxious that they should leave the house without a minute's loss of time, and was soon ready. The child then took him by the hand, and they trod lightly and cautiously down the stairs, trembling whenever a board creaked, and often stopping to listen. The old man had forgotten a kind of wallet which contained the light burden he had to carry, and the going back a few steps to fetch it seemed an interminable delay. At last they reached the passage on the ground floor, where the snoring of Mr Quilp and his legal friend sounded more terrible in their ears than the roars of lions. The bolts of the door were rusty and difficult to unfasten without noise. When they were all drawn back, it was found to be locked, and worst of all, the key was gone. Then the child remembered, for the first time, one of the nurses having told her that Quilp always locked both the house doors at night, and kept the keys on the table in his bedroom. It was not without great fear and trepidation that little Nell slipped off her shoes, and gliding through the storeroom of old curiosities, where Mr Brass, the ugliest piece of goods in all the stock, lay sleeping on a mattress, passed into her own little chamber. Here she stood for a few moments, quite transfixed with terror at the sight of Mr Quilp, who was hanging so far out of the bed that he almost seemed to be standing on his head, and who, either from the uneasiness of this posture, or in one of his agreeable habits, was gasping and growling with his mouth wide open, and the whites, or rather the dirty yellows, of his eyes distinctly visible. It was no time, however, to ask whether anything ailed him, so, possessing herself of the key after one hasty glance about the room, and repassing the prostrate Mr Brass, she rejoined the old man in safety. They got the door open without noise, and passing into the street, stood still. "Which way?" said the child. The old man looked irresolutely and helplessly, first at her, then to the right and left, then at her again, and shook his head. It was plain that she was thenceforth his guide and leader. The child felt it, but had no doubts or misgiving, and putting her hand in his, led him gently away. It was the beginning of a day in June, the deep blue sky unsullied by a cloud and teeming with brilliant light. The streets were, as yet, nearly free from passengers. The houses and shops were closed, and the healthy air of morning fell like breath from angels on the sleeping town. The old man and the child passed on through the glad silence, elate with hope and pleasure. They were alone together once again. Every object was bright and fresh. Nothing reminded them, otherwise than by contrast, of the monotony and constraint they had left behind. Church towers and steeples, frowning and dark at other times, now shone in the sun. Each humble nook and corner rejoiced in light, and the sky, dimmed only by excessive distance, shed its placid smile on everything beneath. Forth from the city, while it yet slumbered, went the two poor adventurers, wandering they knew not whither. End of chapter 12. Chapter 13 of the Old Curiosity Shop. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Nicholson. The Old Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens. Chapter 13. Daniel Quilp of Tower Hill, and Sampson Brass of Bevis Marks in the City of London, gentlemen, one of Her Majesty's attorneys of the Courts of the King's Bench and Common Pleas at Westminster, and a solicitor of the High Court of Chancery, slumbered on, unconscious and unsuspicious of any mischance, until a knocking on the street door, often repeated and gradually mounting up from a modest single rap to a perfect battery of knocks, fired in long discharges with a very short interval between, caused the said Daniel Quilp to struggle into a horizontal position, and to stare at the ceiling with a drowsy indifference, betokening that he heard the noise and rather wondered at the same, and couldn't be at the trouble of bestowing any further thought upon the subject. As the knocking, however, instead of accommodating itself to his lazy state, increased in vigour and became more importunate, as if in earnest remonstrance against his falling asleep again, now that he had once opened his eyes, Daniel Quilp began by degrees to comprehend the possibility of there being somebody at the door, and thus he gradually came to recollect that it was Friday morning, and he had ordered Mrs Quilp to be in waiting upon him at an early hour. Mr Brass, after writhing about in a great many strange attitudes, and often twisting his face and eyes into an expression like that which is usually produced by eating gooseberries very early in the season, was by this time awake also. Seeing that Mr Quilp invested himself in his everyday garments, he hastened to do the like, putting on his shoes before his stockings, and thrusting his legs into his coat sleeves, and making such other small mistakes in his toilet as are not uncommon to those who dress in a hurry, and labour under the agitation of having been suddenly roused. While the attorney was thus engaged, the dwarf was groping under the table, muttering desperate imprecations on himself and mankind in general, and all inanimate objects to boot, which suggested to Mr Brass the question, "What's the matter?" "The key," said the dwarf, looking viciously about him. "The door key, that's the matter. Do you know anything of it?" "How should I know anything of it, sir?" returned Mr Brass. "How should you?" repeated Quilp with a sneer. "You're a nice lawyer, ain't you? You idiot!" Not caring to represent to the dwarf in his present humour that the loss of a key by another person could scarcely be said to affect his, Brass's, legal knowledge in any material degree, Mr Brass humbly suggested that it must have been forgotten overnight, and was doubtless at that moment in its native keyhole. Notwithstanding that Mr Quilp had a strong conviction to the contrary, founded on his recollection of having carefully taken it out, he was fain to admit that this was possible, and therefore went grumbling to the door, where, sure enough, he found it. Now, just as Mr Quilp laid his hand upon the lock, and saw with great astonishment that the fastenings were undone, the knocking came again with the most irritating violence, and the daylight which had been shining through the keyhole was intercepted on the outside by a human eye. The dwarf was very much exasperated, and wanting somebody to wreak his ill humour upon, determined to dart out suddenly, and favour Mrs Quilp with a gentle acknowledgment of her attention in making that hideous uproar. With this view, he drew back the lock very silently and softly, and opening the door all at once, pounced out upon the person on the other side, who had at that moment raised the knocker for another application, and at whom the dwarf ran head first, throwing out his hands and feet together, and biting the air in the fullness of his malice. So far, however, from rushing upon somebody who offered no resistance and implored his mercy, Mr Quilp was no sooner in the arms of the individual whom he had taken for his wife, than he found himself complimented with 2 staggering blows on the head, and 2 more of the same quality in the chest, and closing with his assailant, such a shower of buffets rained down upon his person as sufficed to convince him that he was in skilful and experienced hands. Nothing daunted by this reception, he clung tight to his opponent, and bit and hammered away with such good will and heartiness that it was at least a couple of minutes before he was dislodged. Then, and not until then, Daniel Quilp found himself, all flushed and dishevelled, in the middle of the street, with Mr Richard Swiveller performing a kind of dance round him, and requiring to know whether he wanted any more. 'There's plenty more of it at the same shop,' said Mr Swiveller, by turns advancing and retreating in a threatening attitude. 'A large and extensive assortment always on hand. Country orders executed with promptitude and dispatch. Will you have a little more, sir? Don't say no, if you'd rather not.'
'I thought it was somebody else,' said Quilp, rubbing his shoulders. 'Why didn't you say who you were?'
'Why didn't you say who you were?' returned Dick, 'instead of flying out of the house like a bedlamite?'
'It was you that
knocked,'
said the dwarf, getting up with a short groan. 'Was it?'
'Yes, I am the man,' replied Dick. 'That lady had begun when I came, but she knocked too soft, so I relieved her.' As he said this, he pointed towards Mrs Quilp, who stood trembling at a little distance.
'Humph!'
muttered the dwarf, darting an angry look at his wife.
'I thought it was your fault. And you, sir, don't you know there's been somebody ill here, that you knock as if you'd beat the door down?'
'Damn!' answered Dick. 'That's why I did it. I thought there was somebody dead here.'
'You came for some purpose, I suppose,' said Quilp. 'What is it you want?'
'I want to know how the old gentleman is,' rejoined Mr Swiveller, 'and to hear from Nell herself, with whom I should like to have a little talk. I'm a friend of the family, sir. At least, I'm a friend of one of the family, and that's the same thing.'
'You'd better walk in, then,' said the dwarf. 'Go on, sir, go on. Now, Mrs Quilp, after you, ma'am.'
Mrs Quilp hesitated, but Mr Quilp insisted. And it was not a contest of politeness, or by any means a matter of form, for she knew very well that her husband wished to enter the house in this order, that he might have a favourable opportunity of inflicting a few pinches on her arms, which were seldom free from impressions of his fingers in black and blue colours. Mr Swiveller, who was not in the secret, was a little surprised to hear a suppressed scream, and, looking round, to see Mrs Quilp following him with a sudden jerk. But he did not remark on these appearances, and soon forgot them.
'Now, Mrs Quilp,' said the dwarf, when he had entered the shop, 'go you upstairs, if you please, to Nelly's room, and tell her that she's wanted.'
'You seem to make yourself at home here,' said Dick, who was unacquainted with Mr Quilp's authority.
'I am at home, young gentleman,' returned the dwarf.
Dick was pondering what these words might mean, and still more what the presence of Mr Brass might mean, when Mrs Quilp came hurrying downstairs, declaring that the rooms above were empty.
'Empty, you fool!' said the dwarf.
'I give you my word, Quilp,' answered his trembling wife, 'that I have been into every room, and there's not a soul in any of them.'
'And that,' said Mr Brass, clapping his hands once with an emphasis, 'explains the mystery of the key.' Quilp looked frowningly at him, and frowningly at his wife, and frowningly at Richard Swiveller, but, receiving no enlightenment from any of them, hurried upstairs, whence he soon hurried down again, confirming the report which had already been made.
'It's a strange way of going,' he said, glancing at Swiveller. 'Very strange, not to communicate with me, who am such a close and intimate friend of his. Ah, he'll write to me, no doubt, or he'll bid Nelly write. Yes, that's what he'll do. Nelly's very fond of me. Pretty Nell.'
Mr Swiveller looked, as he was, all open-mouthed astonishment. Still glancing furtively at him, Quilp turned to Mr Brass, and observed, with assumed carelessness, that this need not interfere with the removal of the goods.
'For indeed,' he added, 'we knew that they'd go away to-day, but not that they'd go so early, or so quietly. But they have their reasons, they have their reasons.'
'Where in the devil's name are they gone?' said the wondering Dick. Quilp shook his head, and pursed up his lips, in a manner which implied that he knew very well, but was not at liberty to say.
'And what,' said Dick, looking at the confusion about him, 'what do you mean by moving the goods?' 'That I have bought 'em, sir,' rejoined Quilp. 'Eh? What then?' 'Has the sly old fox made his fortune then, and gone to live in a tranquil cot in a pleasant spot with a distant view of the changing sea?' said Dick, in great bewilderment. 'Keeping his place of retirement very close, that he may not be visited too often by affectionate grandsons and their devoted friends, eh?' added the dwarf, rubbing his hands hard. 'I say nothing, but is that your meaning?' Richard Swiveller was utterly aghast at this unexpected alteration of circumstances, which threatened the complete overthrow of the project in which he bore so conspicuous a part, and seemed to nip his prospects in the bud. Having only received from Frederick Trent, late on the previous night, information of the old man's illness, he had come upon a visit of condolence and inquiry to Nell, prepared with the first instalment of that long train of fascinations which was to fire her heart at last. And here, when he had been thinking of all kinds of graceful and insinuating approaches, and meditating on the fearful retaliation which was slowly working against Sophy Wackles, here were Nell, the old man, and all the money gone, melted away, decamped he knew not whither, as if with a foreknowledge of the scheme and a resolution to defeat it in the very outset, before a step was taken. In his secret heart, Daniel Quilp was both surprised and troubled by the flight which had been made. It had not escaped his keen eye that some indispensable articles of clothing were gone with the fugitives, and knowing the old man's weak state of mind, he marvelled what that course of proceeding might be in which he had so readily procured the concurrence of the child. It must not be supposed, or it would be a gross injustice to Mr Quilp, that he was tortured by any disinterested anxiety on behalf of either. His uneasiness arose from a misgiving that the old man had some secret store of money which he had not suspected, and the idea of its escaping his clutches overwhelmed him with mortification and self-reproach. In this frame of mind, it was some consolation to him to find that Richard Swiveller was, for different reasons, evidently irritated and disappointed by the same cause. It was plain, thought the dwarf, that he had come there on behalf of his friend, to cajole or frighten the old man out of some small fraction of that wealth of which they supposed him to have an abundance. Therefore it was a relief to vex his heart with a picture of the riches the old man hoarded, and to expatiate on his cunning in removing himself even beyond the reach of importunity. 'Well,' said Dick, with a blank look, 'I suppose it's of no use my staying here.' 'Not the least in the world,' rejoined the dwarf. 'You'll mention that I called, perhaps?' said Dick. Mr Quilp nodded, and said he certainly would, the very first time he saw them. 'And say,' added Mr Swiveller, 'say, sir, that I was wafted here upon the pinions of concord, that I came to remove, with the rake of friendship, the seeds of mutual violence and heart-burning, and to sow in their place the germs of social harmony. Will you have the goodness to charge yourself with that commission, sir?' 'Certainly,' rejoined Quilp. 'Will you be kind enough to add to it, sir,' said Dick, producing a very small limp card, 'that is my address, and that I am to be found at home every morning. 2 distinct knocks, sir, will produce the slavey at any time. My particular friends, sir, are accustomed to sneeze when the door is opened, to give her to understand that they are my friends, and have no interested motives in asking if I'm at home. I beg your pardon. Will you allow me to look at that card again?' 'Oh, by all means,' rejoined Quilp. 'By a slight and not unnatural mistake, sir,' said Dick, substituting another in its stead, 'I had handed you the pass ticket of a select convivial circle called the Glorious Apollos, of which I have the honour to be Perpetual Grand. That is the proper document, sir. Good morning.' Quilp bade him good day. The Perpetual Grand Master of the Glorious Apollos, elevating his hat in honour of Mrs Quilp, dropped it carelessly on the side of his head again, and disappeared with a flourish. By this time certain vans had arrived for the conveyance of the goods, and divers strong men in caps were balancing chests of drawers and other trifles of that nature upon their heads, and performing muscular feats which heightened their complexions considerably.
Not to be behindhand in the bustle, Mr Quilp went to work with surprising vigour, hustling and driving the people about like an evil spirit, setting Mrs Quilp upon all kinds of arduous and impracticable tasks, carrying great weights up and down with no apparent effort, kicking the boy from the wharf whenever he could get near him, and inflicting with his loads a great many sly bumps and blows on the shoulders of Mr Brass, as he stood upon the doorsteps to answer all the inquiries of curious neighbours, which was his department. His presence and example diffused such alacrity among the persons employed, that in a few hours the house was emptied of everything but pieces of matting, empty porter-pots, and scattered fragments of straw. Seated like an African chief on one of these pieces of matting, the dwarf was regaling himself in the parlour with bread and cheese and beer, when he observed, without appearing to do so, that a boy was prying in at the outer door. Assured that it was Kit, though he saw little more than his nose, Mr Quilp hailed him by his name, whereupon Kit came in and demanded what he wanted.
'Come here, you sir,' said the dwarf. 'Well, so your old master and young mistress have gone?'
'Where?' rejoined Kit, looking round.
'Do you mean to say you don't know where?' answered Quilp sharply. 'Where have they gone, eh?'
'I don't know,' said Kit.
'Come,' retorted Quilp, 'let's have no more of this. Do you mean to say that you don't know they went away by stealth as soon as it was light this morning?'
'No,' said the boy, in evident surprise.
'You don't know that?' cried Quilp. 'Don't I know that you were hanging about the house the other night, like a thief, eh? Weren't you told then?'
'No,' replied the boy.
'You were not?' said Quilp. 'What were you told then? What were you talking about?'
Kit, who knew no particular reason why he should keep the matter secret now, related the purpose for which he had come on that occasion, and the proposal he had made.
'Oh!'
said the dwarf, after a little consideration.
'Then I think they'll come to you yet.'
'Do you think they will?' cried Kit eagerly.
'Aye, I think they will,' returned the dwarf. 'Now, when they do, let me know. Do you hear? Let me know, and I'll give you something. I want to do 'em a kindness, and I can't do 'em a kindness unless I know where they are. You hear what I say?'
Kit might have returned some answer which would not have been agreeable to his irascible questioner, if the boy from the wharf, who had been skulking about the room in search of anything that might have been left about by accident, had not happened to cry,
'Here's a bird! What's to be done with this?' 'Wring its neck,' rejoined Quilp.
'Oh no, don't do that,' said Kit, stepping forward. 'Give it to me.'
'Ah, I dare say!' cried the other boy. 'Come, you let the cage alone and let me wring its neck, will you? He said I was to do it. You let the cage alone, will you?' 'Give it here. Give it to me, you dogs!' roared Quilp. 'Fight for it, you dogs, or I'll wring its neck myself.'
Without further persuasion, the two boys fell upon each other, tooth and nail, while Quilp, holding up the cage in one hand, and chopping the ground with his knife in an ecstasy, urged them on by his taunts and cries to fight more fiercely. They were pretty equal matched, and rolled about together, exchanging blows which were by no means child's play, until at length Kit, planting a well-directed hit in his adversary's chest, disengaged himself, sprung nimbly up, and snatching the cage from Quilp's hands, made off with his prize. He did not stop once until he reached home, where his bleeding face occasioned great consternation, and caused the elder child to howl dreadfully.
'Good gracious, Kit, what is the matter? What have you been doing?' cried Mrs Nubbles. 'Never you mind, mother,' answered her son, wiping his face on the jack towel behind the door. 'I'm not hurt. Don't you be afraid for me. I've been a-fighting for a bird, and won him, that's all. Hold your noise, little Jacob. I never see such a naughty boy in all my days.' 'You have been fighting for a bird?' exclaimed his mother. 'Ah, fighting for a bird,' replied Kit. 'And here he is. Miss Nelly's bird, mother, that they was a-going to wring the neck of. I stopped that, though. Ah, they wouldn't wring his neck, and me by. No, no, it wouldn't do, mother. It wouldn't do at all.
Kit, laughing so heartily, with his swollen and bruised face looking out of the towel, made little Jacob laugh, and then his mother laughed, and then the baby crowed and kicked with great glee, and then they all laughed in concert, partly because of Kit's triumph, and partly because they were very fond of each other. When this fit was over, Kit exhibited the bird to both children as a great and precious rarity. It was only a poor linnet, and looking about the wall for an old nail, made a scaffolding of a chair and table, and twisted it out with great exultation.
'Let me see,' said the boy. 'I think I'll hang him in the window, because it's more light and cheerful, and he can see the sky there if he looks up very much. He's such a one to sing, I can tell you.'
So the scaffolding was made again, and Kit, climbing up with the poker for a hammer, knocked in the nail and hung up the cage, to the immeasurable delight of the whole family. When it had been adjusted and straightened a great many times, and he had walked backwards into the fireplace in his admiration of it, the arrangement was pronounced to be perfect.
'And now, mother,' said the boy, 'before I rest any more, I'll go out and see if I can find a horse to hold, and then I can buy some bird seed and a bit of something nice for you into the bargain.'
End of chapter 13. Chapter 14 of the Old Curiosity Shop. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Nicholson. The Old Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens. Chapter 14. As it was very easy for Kit to persuade himself that the old house was in his way being anywhere, he tried to look upon his passing it once more as a matter of imperative and disagreeable necessity, quite apart from any desire of his own to which he could not choose but yield. It is not uncommon for people who are much better fed and taught than Christopher Nubbles had ever been, to make duties of their inclinations in matters of more doubtful propriety, and to take great credit for the self-denial with which they gratify themselves. There was no need of any caution this time, and no fear of being detained by having to play out a return match with Daniel Quilp's boy. The place was entirely deserted, and looked as dusty and dingy as if it had been so for months. A rusty padlock was fastened on the door, ends of discoloured blinds and curtains flapped drearily against the half-opened upper windows, and the crooked holes cut in the closed shutters below were black with the darkness of the inside. Some of the glass in the window he had so often watched had been broken in the rough hurry of the morning, and that room looked more deserted and dull than any. A group of idle urchins had taken possession of the doorsteps. Some were plying the knocker, and listening with delighted dread to the hollow sounds it spread through the dismantled house. Others were clustered about the keyhole, watching half in jest and half in earnest for the ghost, which an hour's gloom, added to the mystery that hung about the late inhabitants, had already raised. Standing all alone in the midst of the business and bustle of the street, the house looked a picture of cold desolation, and Kit, who remembered the cheerful fire that used to burn there on a winter's night, and the no less cheerful laugh that made the small room ring, turned quite mournfully away. It must be especially observed in justice to poor Kit, that he was by no means of a sentimental turn, and perhaps had never heard that adjective in all his life. He was only a soft-hearted, grateful fellow, and had nothing genteel or polite about him. Consequently, instead of going home again in his grief to kick the children and abuse his mother, for, when your finely strung people are out of sorts, they must have everybody else unhappy likewise, he turned his thoughts to the vulgar expedient of making them more comfortable if he could. Bless us, what a number of gentlemen on horseback there were riding up and down, and how few of them wanted their horses held! A good city speculator or a parliamentary commissioner could have told to a fraction, and the crowds that were cantering about, what sum of money was realized in London in the course of a year by holding horses alone. And undoubtedly it would have been a very large one if only a 20th part of the gentlemen without grooms had had occasion to alight. But they had not, and it is often an ill-natured circumstance like this which spoils the most ingenious estimate in the world. Kit walked about, now with quick steps and now with slow, now lingering as some rider slackened his horse's pace and looked about him, and now darting at full speed up a by-street as he caught a glimpse of some distant horseman going lazily up the shady side of the road and promising to stop at every door. But on they all went, one after another, and there was not a penny stirring. I wonder, thought the boy, if one of these gentlemen knew there was nothing in the cupboard at home, whether he'd stop on purpose and make believe that he wanted to call somewhere that I might earn a trifle. He was quite tired out with pacing the streets, to say nothing of repeated disappointments, and was sitting down upon a step to rest, when there approached towards him a little clattering, jingling, four-wheeled chaise, drawn by a little obstinate-looking, rough-coated pony, and driven by a little fat, placid-faced old gentleman. Beside the little old gentleman sat a little old lady, plump and placid like himself, and the pony was coming along at his own pace and doing exactly as he pleased with the whole concern. If the old gentleman remonstrated by shaking the reins, the pony replied by shaking his head. It was plain that the utmost the pony would consent to do was to go in his own way up any street that the old gentleman particularly wished to traverse, but that it was an understanding between them that he must do this after his own fashion, or not at all. As they passed where he sat, Kit looked so wistfully at the little turnout that the old gentleman looked at him. Kit rising and putting his hand to his hat, the old gentleman intimated to the pony that he wished to stop, to which proposal the pony, who seldom objected to that part of his duty, graciously acceded. "I beg your pardon, sir," said Kit. "I'm sorry you stopped, sir. I only meant, did you want your horse minded?" "I'm going to get down in the next street," returned the old gentleman. "If you like to come on after us, you may have the job." Kit thanked him, and joyfully obeyed. The pony ran off at a sharp angle to inspect a lamp-post on the opposite side of the way, and then went off at a tangent to another lamp-post on the other side. Having satisfied himself that they were of the same pattern and materials, he came to a stop, apparently absorbed in meditation. "Will you go on, sir?" said the old gentleman gravely, "or are we to wait here for you till it's too late for our appointment?" The pony remained immovable.
"Oh, you naughty Whisker!" said the old lady. "Fie upon you! I'm ashamed of such conduct."
The pony appeared to be touched by this appeal to his feelings, for he trotted on directly, though in a sulky manner, and stopped no more until he came to a door whereon was a brass plate with the words, "Witherden, Notary." Here the old gentleman got out and helped out the old lady, and then took from under the seat a nosegay, resembling in shape and dimensions a full-sized warming-pan, with the handle cut short off. This the old lady carried into the house with a staid and stately air, and the old gentleman, who had a club foot, followed close upon her. They went, as it was easy to tell from the sound of their voices, into the front parlour, which seemed to be a kind of office. The day being very warm and the street a quiet one, the windows were wide open, and it was easy to hear through the Venetian blinds all that passed inside. At first there was a great shaking of hands and shuffling of feet, succeeded by the presentation of the nosegay. For a voice, supposed by the listener to be that of Mr Witherden the notary, was heard to exclaim a great many times, "Oh, delicious! Oh, fragrant indeed!" and a nose, also supposed to be the property of that gentleman, was heard to inhale the scent with a snuffle of exceeding pleasure.
"I brought it in honour of the occasion, sir," said the old lady.
"Ah! An occasion indeed, ma'am. An occasion which does honour to me, ma'am, honour to me," rejoined Mr Witherden the notary. "I have had many a gentleman article to me, ma'am, many a one. Some of them are now rolling in riches, unmindful of their old companion and friend, ma'am. Others are in the habit of calling upon me to this day, and saying, "Mr. Witherden, some of the pleasantest hours I ever spent in my life were spent in this office, were spent, sir, upon this very stool." But there was never one among the number, ma'am, attached as I have been to many of them, of whom I augured such bright things as I do of your only son.'
'Oh dear!' said the old lady. 'How happy you do make us when you tell us that, to be sure!'
'I tell you, ma'am,' said Mr Witherden, 'what I think is an honest man, which, as the poet observes, is the noblest work of God. I agree with the poet in every particular, ma'am. The mountainous Alps on the one hand, or a humming-bird on the other, is nothing, in point of workmanship, to an honest man. Or woman. Or woman.'
'Anything that Mr Witherden can say of me,' observed a small quiet voice, 'I can say with interest of him, I am sure.'
'It's a happy circumstance, a truly happy circumstance,' said the notary, 'to happen to upon his 28th birthday, and I hope I know how to appreciate it. I trust, Mr Garland, my dear sir, that we may mutually congratulate each other upon this auspicious occasion.' To this the old gentleman replied that he felt assured they might. There appeared to be another shaking of hands in consequence, and when it was over, the old gentleman said that, though he said it, who should not? He believed no son had ever been a greater comfort to his parents than Abel Garland had been to his. 'Marrying as his mother and I did, late in life, sir, after waiting for a great many years until we were well enough off, coming together when we were no longer young, and then being blessed with one child who has always been dutiful and affectionate, why, it's a source of great happiness to us both, sir.' 'Of course it is. I have no doubt of it,' returned the notary in a sympathizing voice. 'It's the contemplation of this sort of thing that makes me deplore my fate in being a bachelor. There was a young lady once, sir, the daughter of an outfitting warehouse of the first respectability, but that's a weakness. Chuckster, bring in Mr Abel's articles.' 'You see, Mr Witherden,' said the old lady, 'that Abel has not been brought up like the run of young men. He has always had a pleasure in our society, and always been with us. Abel has never been absent from us for a day, has he, my dear?' 'Never, my dear,' returned the old gentleman, 'except when he went to Margate one Saturday with Mr Tomkinley, that had been a teacher at that school he went to, and came back upon the Monday. But he was very ill after that, you remember, my dear. It was quite a dissipation.'
'He was not used to it, you know,' said the old lady, 'and he couldn't bear it, that's the truth. Besides, he had no comfort in being there without us, and had nobody to talk to or enjoy himself with.'
'That was it, you know,' interposed the same small quiet voice that had spoken once before. 'I was quite abroad, mother, quite desolate, and to think that the sea was between us. Oh, I never shall forget what I felt when I first thought that the sea was between us.'
'Very natural under the circumstances,' observed the notary. 'Mr Abel's feelings did credit to his nature, and credit to your nature, ma'am, and his father's nature, and human nature. I trace the same current now, flowing through all his quiet and unobtrusive proceedings. I am about to sign my name, you observe, at the foot of the articles, which Mr Chuckster will witness, and placing my finger upon this blue wafer with the vandyked corners, I am constrained to remark in a distinct tone of voice, don't be alarmed, ma'am, it is merely a form of law, that I deliver this as my act and deed. Mr Abel will place his name against the other wafer, repeating the same cabalistic words, and the business is over. You see how easily these things are done.' There was a short silence, apparently while Mr Abel went through the prescribed form,
and then the shaking of hands and shuffling of feet were renewed, and shortly afterwards there was a clinking of wine glasses and a great talkativeness on the part of everybody. In about a quarter of an hour, Mr Chuckster, with a pen behind his ear and his face inflamed with wine, appeared at the door, and condescending to address Kit by the jocose appellation of young Snob, informed him that the visitors were coming out. Out they came forthwith, Mr Witherden, who was short, chubby, fresh-coloured, brisk, and pompous, leading the old lady with extreme politeness, and the father and son following them arm in arm. Mr Abel, who had a quaint old-fashioned air about him, looked nearly of the same age as his father, and bore a wonderful resemblance to him in face and figure, though wanting something of his full, round cheerfulness, and substituting in its place a timid reserve. In all other respects, in the neatness of the dress, and even in the club foot, he and the old gentleman were precisely alike. Having seen the old lady safely in her seat, and assisted in the arrangement of her cloak and a small basket which formed an indispensable portion of her equipage, Mr Abel got into a little box behind, which had evidently been made for his express accommodation, and smiled at everybody present by turns, beginning with his mother and ending with the pony. There was then a great to-do to make the pony hold up his head, that the bearing rein might be fastened. At last even this was effected. The old gentleman, taking his seat and the reins, put his hand in his pocket to find a sixpence for Kit. He had no sixpence. Neither had the old lady, nor Mr Abel, nor the notary, nor Mr Chuckster. The old gentleman thought a shilling too much, but there was no shop in the street to get change at, so he gave it to the boy. "There," he said jokingly, "I'm coming here again next Monday at the same time, and mind you're here, my lad, to work it out."
"Thank you, sir," said Kit. "I'll be sure to be here." He was quite serious, but they all laughed heartily at his saying so, especially Mr Chuckster, who roared outright and appeared to relish the joke amazingly. As the pony, with a presentiment that he was going home, or a determination that he would not go anywhere else, which was the same thing, trotted away pretty nimbly, Kit had no time to justify himself, and went his way also. Having expended his treasure in such purchases as he knew would be most acceptable at home, not forgetting some seed for the wonderful bird, he hastened back as fast as he could, so elated with his success and great good fortune that he more than half expected Nell and the old man would have arrived before him. End of chapter 14. Chapter 15 of the Old Curiosity Shop. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Nicholson. The Old Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens. Chapter 15. Often, while they were yet pacing the silent streets of the town on the morning of their departure, the child trembled with a mingled sensation of hope and fear, as in some far-off figure, imperfectly seen in the clear distance, her fancy traced a likeness to honest Kit. But although she would gladly have given him her hand, and thanked him for what he had said at their last meeting, it was always a relief to find, when they came nearer to each other, that the person who approached was not he, but a stranger. For even if she had not dreaded the effect which the sight of him might have wrought upon her fellow-traveller, she felt that to bid farewell to anybody now, and most of all to him who had been so faithful and so true, was more than she could bear. It was enough to leave dumb things behind and objects that were insensible both to her love and sorrow. To have parted from her only other friend upon the threshold of that wild journey would have wrung her heart indeed. Why is it that we can better bear to part in spirit than in body, and while we have the fortitude to act farewell, have not the nerve to say it? On the eve of long voyages, or an absence of many years, friends who are tenderly attached will separate with the usual look, the usual pressure of the hand, planning one final interview for the morrow, while each well knows that it is but a poor feint to save the pain of uttering that one word, and that the meeting will never be. Should possibilities be worse to bear than certainties?
We do not shun our dying friends. The not having distinctly taken leave of one among them, whom we left in all kindness and affection, will often embitter the whole remainder of a life. The town was glad with morning light. Places that had shone ugly and distrustful all night long now wore a smile, and sparkling sunbeams dancing on chamber windows and twinkling through blind and curtain before sleepers' eyes, shed light even into dreams, and chased away the shadows of the night. Birds in hot rooms, covered up close and dark, felt it was morning, and chafed and grew restless in their little cells. Bright-eyed mice crept back to their tiny homes and nestled timidly together. The sleek house-cat, forgetful of her prey, sat winking at the rays of sun starting through keyhole and cranny in the door, and longed for her stealthy run and warm sleek bask outside. The nobler beasts confined in dens stood motionless behind their bars and gazed on fluttering boughs, and sunshine peeping through some little window, with eyes in which old forests gleamed, then trod impatiently the track their prisoned feet had worn, and stopped and gazed again. Men in their dungeons stretched their cramp cold limbs and cursed the stone that no bright sky could warm. The flowers that sleep by night opened their gentle eyes and turned them to the day. The light, creation's mind, was everywhere, and all things owned its power. The two pilgrims, often pressing each other's hands or exchanging a smile or cheerful look, pursued their way in silence. Bright and happy as it was, there was something solemn in the long deserted streets, from which, like bodies without souls, all habitual character and expression had departed, leaving but one dead uniform repose that made them all alike. All was so still at that early hour, that the few pale people whom they met seemed as much unsuited to the scene as the sickly lamp, which had been here and there left burning, was powerless and faint in the full glory of the sun. Before they had penetrated very far into the labyrinth of men's abodes which yet lay between them and the outskirts, this aspect began to melt away, and noise and bustle to usurp its place. Some straggling carts and coaches rumbling by first broke the charm, then others came, then others yet more active, then a crowd. The wonder was, at first, to see a tradesman's window open, but it was a rare thing soon to see one closed. Then smoke rose slowly from the chimneys, and sashes were thrown up to let in air, and doors were opened, and servant girls, looking lazily in all directions but their brooms, scattered brown clouds of dust into the eyes of shrinking passengers, or listened disconsolately to milkmen who spoke of country fairs, and told of waggons in the mews, with awnings and all things complete, and gallant swains to boot, which another hour would see upon their journey. This quarter past, they came upon the haunts of commerce and great traffic, where many people were resorting and business was already rife. The old man looked about him with a startled and bewildered gaze, for these were places that he hoped to shun. He pressed his finger on his lip, and drew the child along by narrow courts and winding ways, nor did he seem at ease until they had left it far behind, often casting a backward look towards it, murmuring that ruin and self-murder were crouching in every street, and would follow if they scented them, and that they could not fly too fast. Again this quarter past, they came upon a straggling neighbourhood, where the mean houses parcelled off in rooms, and windows patched with rags and paper, told of the populous poverty that sheltered there. The shops sold goods that only poverty could buy, and sellers and buyers were pinched and griped alike. Here were poor streets, where faded gentility essayed with scanty space and shipwrecked means to make its last feeble stand, but tax-gatherer and creditor came there as elsewhere, and the poverty that yet faintly struggled was hardly less squalid and manifest than that which had long ago submitted and given up the game. This was a wide, wide track, for the humble followers of the camp of wealth pitched their tents round about it for many a mile, but its character was still the same. Damp, rotten houses, many to let, many yet building, many half-built and mouldering away, lodgings where it would be hard to tell which needed pity most, those who let or those who came to take. Children, scantily fed and clothed, spread over every street, and sprawling in the dust, scolding mothers stamping their slipshod feet with noisy threats upon the pavement, shabby fathers hurrying with dispirited looks to the occupation which brought them daily bread and little more, mangling women, washerwomen, cobblers, tailors, chandlers, driving their trades in parlours and kitchens and back room and garrets, and sometimes all of them under the same roof, brick fields skirting gardens paled with staves of old casks, or timber pillaged from houses burnt down and blackened and blistered by the flames, mounds of dockweed, nettles, coarse grass, and oyster shells heaped in rank confusion, small dissenting chapels to teach, with no lack of illustration, the miseries of earth, and plenty of new churches erected with as little superfluous wealth to show the way to heaven. At length these streets, becoming more straggling yet, dwindled and dwindled away until there were only small garden patches bordering the road, with many a summer house innocent of paint and built of old timber or some fragments of a boat, green as the tough cabbage stalks that grew about it, and grottoed at the seams with toadstools and tight-sticking snails. To these succeeded pert cottages, 2 and 2, with plots of ground in front, laid out in angular beds with stiff box borders and narrow paths between, where footstep never strayed to make the gravel rough. Then came the public house, freshly painted in green and white, with tea gardens and a bowling green, spurning its old neighbour with the horse trough where the waggons stopped. Then fields, and then some houses, one by one, of goodly size, with lawns, some even with a lodge, where dwelt a porter and his wife. Then came a turnpike, then fields again with trees and haystacks, then a hill, and on the top of that the traveller might stop and, looking back at old St. Paul's looming through the smoke, its cross peeping above the cloud, if the day were clear, and glittering in the sun, and casting his eyes upon the Babel out of which it grew, until he traced it down to the furthest outposts of the invading army of bricks and mortar, whose station lay for the present nearly at his feet, might feel at last that he was clear of London. Near such a spot as this, and in a pleasant field, the old man and his little guide, if guide she were who knew not whither they were bound, sat down to rest. She had had the precaution to furnish a basket with some slices of bread and meat, and here they made their frugal breakfast. The freshness of the day, the singing of the birds, the beauty of the waving grass, the deep green leaves, the wild flowers, and the thousand exquisite scents and sounds that floated in the air, deep joys to most of us, but most of all to those whose life is in a crowd, or who live solitarily in great cities, as in the bucket of a human well, sunk into their breasts, and made them very glad. The child had repeated her artless prayers once that morning, more earnestly perhaps than she had ever done in all her life, but as she felt all this, they rose to her lips again. The old man took off his hat. He had no memory for the words, but he said Amen, and that they were very good. There had been an old copy of the Pilgrim's Progress, with strange plates, upon a shelf at home, over which she had often pored whole evenings, wondering whether it was true in every word, and where those distant countries with the curious names might be. As she looked back upon the place they had left, one part of it came strongly on her mind. "Dear grandfather," she said, "only that this place is prettier, and a great deal better than the real one. If that in the book is like it, I feel as if we were both Christian, and laid down on this grass all the cares and troubles we brought with us, never to take them up again."
"No, never to return, never to return," replied the old man, waving his hand towards the city. "Thou and I are free of it now, Nell. They shall never lure us back."
"Are you tired?" said the child. "Are you sure you don't feel ill from this long walk?"
"I shall never feel ill again, now that we are once away," was his reply. "Let us be stirring, Nell. We must be further away, a long, long way further. We are too near to stop and be at rest. Come." There was a pool of clear water in the field,
in which the child laved her hands and face, and cooled her feet before setting forth to walk again. She would have the old man refresh himself in this way too, and making him sit down upon the grass, cast the water on him with her hands, and dried it with her simple dress. "I can do nothing for myself, my darling," said the grandfather. "I don't know how it is. I could once, but the time's gone. Don't leave me, Nell. Say that thou'lt not leave me. I loved thee all the while, indeed I did. If I lose thee too, my dear, I must die." He laid his head upon her shoulder, and moaned piteously. The time had been, and a very few days before, when the child could not have restrained her tears, and must have wept with him. But now she soothed him with gentle and tender words, smiled at his thinking they could ever part, and rallied him cheerfully upon the jest. He was soon calmed and fell asleep, singing to himself in a low voice, like a little child. He awoke refreshed, and they continued their journey. The road was pleasant, lying between beautiful pastures and fields of corn, about which, poised high in the clear blue sky, the lark trilled out her happy song. The air came laden with the fragrance it caught upon its way, and the bees, upborne upon its scented breath, hummed forth their drowsy satisfaction as they floated by. They were now in the open country. The houses were very few and scattered at long intervals, often miles apart. Occasionally they came upon a cluster of poor cottages, some with a chair or low board put across the open door to keep the scrambling children from the road, others shut up close while all the family were working in the fields. These were often the commencement of a little village, and after an interval came a wheelwright's shed, or perhaps a blacksmith's forge, then a thriving farm with sleepy cows lying about the yard, and horses peering over the low wall, and scampering away when harnessed horses passed upon the road, as though in triumph at their freedom. There were dull pigs too, turning up the ground in search of dainty food, and grunting their monotonous grumblings as they prowled about or crossed each other in their quest, plump pigeons skimming round the roof or strutting on the eaves, and ducks and geese, far more graceful in their own conceit, waddling awkwardly about the edges of the pond or sailing glibly on its surface. The farmyard passed, then came the little inn, the humbler beer shop, and the village tradesmen's, then the lawyers and the parsons, at whose dread names the beer shop trembled. The church then peeped out modestly from a clump of trees. Then there were a few more cottages, then the cage and pound, and not unfrequently, on a bank by the wayside, a deep old dusty well. Then came the trim-hedged fields on either hand, and the open road again. They walked all day and slept that night at a small cottage where beds were let to travellers. Next morning they were afoot again, and though jaded at first and very tired, recovered before long, and proceeded briskly forward. They often stopped to rest, but only for a short space at a time, and still kept on, having had but slight refreshment since the morning. It was nearly 5 o'clock in the afternoon, when, drawing near another cluster of labourers' huts, the child looked wistfully in each, doubtful at which to ask for permission to rest a while and buy a draught of milk. It was not easy to determine, for she was timid and fearful of being repulsed. Here was a crying child, and there a noisy wife. In this the people seemed too poor, in that too many. At length she stopped at one where the family were seated round the table, chiefly because there was an old man sitting in a cushioned chair beside the hearth, and she thought he was a grandfather, and would feel for hers. There were besides the cottager and his wife, and 3 young sturdy children, brown as berries. The request was no sooner preferred than granted. The eldest boy ran out to fetch some milk, the second dragged 2 stools towards the door, and the youngest crept to his mother's gown and looked at the strangers from beneath his sunburnt hand. "God save you, master," said the old cottager in a thin piping voice. "Are you travelling far?" "Yes, sir, a long way," replied the child, for her grandfather appealed to her. "From London?" inquired the old man. The child said yes. Ah, he had been in London many a time, used to go there often once with waggons. It was nigh 32 year since he had been there last, and he did hear say there were great changes. Like enough, he had changed himself since then. 32 year was a long time, and 84 a great age, though there were some he had known that had lived to very hard upon 100, and not so hearty as he neither. No, nothing like it.
"Sit thee down, master, in the elbow chair," said the old man, knocking his stick upon the brick floor, and trying to do so sharply. "Take a pinch out of that box. I don't take much myself, for it comes dear, but I find it wakes me up sometimes, and you're but a boy to me. I should have a son pretty nigh as old as you if he'd lived, but they listed him for a sojer. He come back home, though, for all he had but one poor leg. He always said he'd be buried near the sundial he used to climb upon when he was a baby, did my poor boy, and his words come true. You can see the place with your own eyes. We've kept the turf up ever since."
He shook his head, and looking at his daughter with watery eyes, said she needn't be afraid that he was going to talk about that any more. He didn't wish to trouble nobody, and if he had troubled anybody by what he said, he asked pardon. That was all. The milk arrived, and the child producing her little basket, and selecting its best fragments for her grandfather, they made a hearty meal. The furniture of the room was very homely, of course. A few rough chairs and a table, a corner cupboard with their little stock of crockery and delf, a gaudy tea-tray representing a lady in bright red, walking out with a very blue parasol, a few common coloured scripture subjects in frames upon the wall and chimney, an old dwarf clothes-press, and an 8-day clock, with a few bright saucepans and a kettle, comprised the whole. But everything was clean and neat, and as the child glanced round, she felt a tranquil air of comfort and content, to which she had long been unaccustomed.
"How far is it to any town or village?"
she asked of the husband. "A matter of good 5 mile, me dear," was the reply. "But you're not going on to-night?"
"Yes, yes, Nell,"
said the old man hastily, urging her to by signs.
Further on, darling, further away if we walk till midnight."
"There's a good barn hard by, master," said the man, "or this traveller's lodging, I know, at the Plough and Arrow. Excuse me, but you do seem a little tired, unless you're very anxious to get on."
"Yes, yes, we are," returned the old man fretfully. "Further away, dear Nell, pray further away."
"We must go on indeed,"
said the child, yielding to his restless wish.
"We thank you very much, but we cannot stop so soon. I am quite ready, grandfather."
But the woman had observed, from the young wanderer's gait, that one of her little feet was blistered and sore, and being a woman, and a mother too, she would not suffer her to go until she had washed the place and applied some simple remedy, which she did so carefully and with such a gentle hand, rough-grained and hard though it was with work, that the child's heart was too full to admit of her saying more than a fervent "God bless you," nor could she look back nor trust herself to speak until they had left the cottage some distance behind. When she turned her head, she saw that the whole family, even the old grandfather, were standing in the road watching them as they went, and so, with many waves of the hand and cheering nods, and on one side at least not without tears, they parted company. They trudged forward more slowly and painfully than they had done yet, for another mile or thereabouts, when they heard the sound of wheels behind them, and looking round, observed an empty cart approaching pretty briskly. The driver, on coming up to them, stopped his horse and looked earnestly at Nell. "Didn't you stop to rest at a cottage yonder?" he said.
"Yes, sir,"
replied the child. "Ah! They asked me to look out for you," said the man.
I'm going your way. Give me your hand. Jump up, master.'
This was a great relief, for they were very much fatigued and could scarcely crawl along. To them the jolting cart was a luxurious carriage, and the ride the most delicious in the world. Nell had scarcely settled herself on a little heap of straw in one corner, when she fell asleep, for the first time that day. She was awakened by the stopping of the cart, which was about to turn up a by-lane. The driver kindly got down to help her out, and pointing to some trees at a very short distance before them, said that the town lay there, and that they had better take the path which they would see leading through the churchyard. Accordingly, towards this spot they directed their weary steps. End of chapter 15.